She signed the divorce papers while her husband looked at his phone. His mistress sat beside him, smiling like she'd just won the lottery. 3 years of marriage. 3 years Selene Vale believed she was loved. All crumbled in less than 10 minutes in a cold courtroom. But as she stepped out into the rain, a black armored car pulled up. And the man who stepped out made the city hold its breath. Cassian Drax. The name the police whispered, the name politicians feared to utter aloud. He took off his gloves, stepped into the rain, and draped his coat over her shoulders. No one understood why, not even Selene. If you want to know what happens next, like this, leave a comment with the city you're viewing from so I know how far this story has progressed. And don't go anywhere, because what's about to happen will keep you glued to your screen. The rain didn't care about Selene Vale's dignity. It hit the courthouse steps hard and sideways, the kind of October rain that felt deliberate, like the city itself had decided today was the right day to make everything worse. Selene stood under the narrow stone overhang with her portfolio clutched to her chest and her heels already soaked through, watching the water run down the marble steps in thin brown rivers, and she told herself she was not going to cry. Not here, not where the parking lot cameras could see her, not where any one of Adrian's contacts, and he had contacts everywhere, in every building, behind every desk, might be watching. She had not cried inside. She was not going to cry outside. Her fingers were still trembling. She looked down at them like they belonged to someone else. The left hand, the ring finger, the small indentation in her skin where the wedding band used to sit. 3 years of pressure compressed into a pale groove that hadn't faded yet. It would fade. The attorney had told her the settlement was final. The judge had signed. Adrian Mercer had not looked at her once during the entire proceeding, not when the judge read the terms. Not when Selene's attorney objected to the asset division and was overruled. Not when Selene herself signed the papers with a pen that barely had any ink left, and she'd had to press hard enough that her knuckles went white. He'd looked at his phone. That was the part she kept returning to. Not the settlement, not the numbers, which were grotesque in their unfairness. She'd walked out of 3 years of her life with a fraction of what she'd come in with, after legal fees, after Adrian's lawyers had reclassified half their shared assets as premarital property through documentation she still didn't fully understand. Not even the humiliation of sitting across from Vivian Cross, Adrian's mistress, who had attended the proceedings for no legal reason whatsoever except to be there, to witness, to make sure Selene understood exactly what kind of woman she was dealing with. It was the phone. The fact that ending their marriage didn't even warrant his full attention. Selene exhaled slowly, the breath fogged in the cold air. Behind her, through the glass courthouse doors, she could hear them. Vivian's laugh, low and practiced, the laugh of a woman who had rehearsed being observed. And Adrian's voice, doing the thing it always did when he was pleased with himself, dropping half an octave, becoming almost gentle. He used that voice with investors. He used it with judges. He had used it with Selene once, when she was 26 and stupid enough to think a man speaking softly meant he had something worth saying quietly. She stepped out from under the overhang. The rain soaked her immediately. Shoulder to hip in about 4 seconds, her blazer heavy and dark, her hair coming loose from its knot and flattening against her neck. She didn't run for her car. She didn't have a car anymore, technically. That had been part of the settlement, the car she'd bought with her own earnings reclassified as a shared marital asset and awarded to Adrian, because of course it had been. She'd planned to take a cab. She had the app open. The nearest driver was 11 minutes away. She stood on the courthouse steps in the rain and waited. And that was when the convoy appeared. 3 vehicles. Black. The kind of black that wasn't just a color but an intention. Matte. Absorbing light. The black of something that wanted to be seen but not understood. SUVs with tinted windows and reinforced panels that sat too low and too still, even in the wind. They rolled to the curb in a line with the coordinated precision of something that had been choreographed, and they stopped without any of the small mechanical sounds that normal cars made. No creak, no shudder, just silence and rain. The doors opened. Men emerged first. 4 of them, suits so dark they nearly disappeared into the weather, moving with the specific kind of economy that Selene associated with soldiers, except quieter, more controlled, with that extra layer of patience that soldiers didn't always have. They fanned out across the steps without seeming to decide to do it. just occurring in positions that covered every angle. Eyes moving across the street, across the buildings, across Selene herself with a brief, assessing sweep that reduced her to a variable before moving on. Then the rear door of the center vehicle opened. Selene had seen Cassian Drax's photograph exactly once. In a newspaper 3 years ago, some financial investigation piece that Adrian had been reading at breakfast and dismissed as sensationalist journalism. In the photograph, Drax had been blurred, caught at the edge of a frame, turning away from a camera he'd clearly noticed too late. She'd registered dark hair, broad shoulders, the back of a suit jacket, a non-face attached to a name that the article described, with careful legal hedging, as allegedly connected to organized crime at the highest levels of Blackthorn's financial infrastructure. The man who stepped out of the convoy was not a blurred photograph. He was tall. Not the theatrical tallness of someone who had learned to use their height as a performance, but the genuine, indifferent tallness of a man who had simply stopped caring about whether he filled a room. He was perhaps 38, perhaps older. His face was the kind that had been through weather and come out sharper for it, all angles and stillness, with eyes the color of something that didn't have a good name in English, but existed somewhere between gray and the moment before a storm. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the collar of his shirt open one button, and black gloves that he was already removing as he stepped onto the rain-slicked pavement. He looked at her. Not through her the way Adrian had learned to look at her in their final year, not past her the way his lawyers had. He looked at her the way you look at something you've been thinking about for a long time and are finally seen in person, with a quality of recognition that Selene could not explain, because she had never met this man. She was certain of it. She would have remembered. He walked toward her. Not fast, not slow. That particular pace of a person for whom the space between themselves and their destination is already theirs. He stopped 2 feet away. The rain hit his shoulders and ran off the fabric without soaking through. He looked down at her. She was 5'7" in these heels, and he still had several inches on her. And then, without speaking, he held out his coat. Not a gesture toward it. Not an offer she could politely decline. He simply removed it and placed it over her shoulders with a movement so practiced and so complete that Selene found herself holding the lapels before she'd made a decision to do so. The coat was warm. It smelled like cedar, and something underneath that she couldn't name. He said nothing. She said, "I don't know you." "No," he agreed. His voice was low, unhurried. The voice of a man who did not feel silence because he was uncomfortable with it. "Then why—" "You're getting soaked," he said. "My car is at the curb." "I didn't ask for—" "I know." He looked at her steadily. "You don't have to come. But you've been standing in the rain for 4 minutes and your ride is still 7 minutes out, and it's 41 degrees. She stared at him. "You know when I ordered my cab?" He didn't answer that, which was, Selene thought distantly, an answer of its own. She should have said no. She understood that, in the way you understand that a door is a door even while you're walking through it. She should have stepped back, handed the coat to one of his men, called someone she knew, anyone she knew, and waited out the 7 minutes in the rain like a person with reasonable instincts about self-preservation. Everything she knew about Cassian Drax, which was admittedly thin, newspaper-sourced, legally hedged, pointed in one direction, and that direction was not get in the car. She got in the car. The interior was quiet in the way that expensive things were quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the absorption of it. Black leather, temperature-controlled, some piece of classical music playing so low she felt it more than heard it. She sat in the back seat and held his coat around her shoulders and watched the courthouse steps slide past the tinted window. Adrian and Vivian came out as the convoy pulled away. She saw them through the glass. Adrian in his gray cashmere coat, Vivian's red umbrella snapping open like a flag being planted. Adrian looked up. He scanned the street with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to checking whether he was being observed, and his gaze landed on the convoy, on the specific vehicle she was sitting in. Even through 2 layers of tinted glass, even at 40 feet, she saw his face change. She didn't know what he recognized. She didn't know then what it meant. She turned away from the window. Cassian was watching her. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. "Why are you doing this?" A pause. Long enough to be deliberate. "Not here." "Then when?" He looked out his own window. Some building was passing, gray and rain-stained. When you're ready to hear an answer that's more complicated than the question. Selene held the coat tighter. You say things like that like they're supposed to be comforting. They're not supposed to be anything, he said. They're just true. She gave him her address. An apartment. Her apartment, technically, though she'd only moved in 2 weeks ago after leaving the house that had also, in the end, been determined to be premarital property. 2 weeks of boxes still unpacked, of a mattress on the floor because she hadn't gotten around to the bed frame, of eating takeout over the kitchen sink because she had 4 plates and they were all in a box somewhere and she didn't know which one. She'd had more than 4 plates once. She'd had a lot of things once. The convoy stopped in front of her building. One of his men opened her door before she'd registered that they'd stopped. She climbed out into the rain, lighter now, more mist than rain, and realized she was still wearing his coat. She started to shrug out of it. Keep it, Cassian said. He hadn't moved from the vehicle, was looking at her from the open door, one arm resting on his knee, the posture of a man who was never rushed. Until the next time. There won't be a next time. He almost smiled. It was a subtle thing, more in the eyes than the mouth, and it bothered her in a way she couldn't categorize. All right, he said simply. The door closed. The convoy pulled away. Selene stood in front of her building in a coat that wasn't hers and watched it go, and told herself that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. The next morning, she found a notification from her bank, a fraudulent transaction alert, her secondary account, the one she'd moved her personal savings into after the divorce proceedings started. The transaction was for $11.40 at a gas station in a part of the city she'd never been to. Small enough to be an accident, specific enough to be a message. She called the bank, flagged it, changed her password. That afternoon, her landlord called to say there'd been a water main issue in the building. Nothing serious, she didn't need to be home. And when she came back that evening and unlocked her door, she had the specific, impossible-to-articulate feeling of a space that had been entered and returned to its original position. Nothing was missing. Nothing was visibly moved. But her boxes were in slightly different configurations, the subtle geometry of her recent life rearranged by millimeters. Someone had been in her apartment. She stood in the middle of her kitchen, still in her work coat, the city-lit orange outside her window, and she breathed through the cold feeling spreading across her chest. She thought about calling the police. She thought about who was doing this. She thought, with the specific horror of hindsight arriving too late, about the conversation with her divorce attorney 3 weeks ago, the one where he'd explained, with careful, professional distance, that Adrian's legal team had been unusually aggressive in reclassifying assets, that some of the documentation appeared to reference accounts and transactions that shouldn't have been accessible without inside knowledge, that there were some irregularities in the foundation paperwork that the attorney was ethically required to flag. The foundation, her family's foundation. The Alistair Vale Foundation, named for her grandfather, established to fund women's education initiatives and managed jointly by Selene and her cousin Marcus after her parents died 4 years ago. She'd brought it into the marriage in the sense that she'd brought herself into the marriage, as background, as context, as the thing she was when Adrian wasn't looking. She hadn't involved Adrian in it. He'd never asked to be involved. He'd made a point, actually, of saying it was hers, saying it with that soft voice, that half-octave drop, saying it was beautiful, that she had something of her own. She'd thought that was respect. She was standing in her kitchen rearranging what that might have meant instead when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it because she was already inside the cold feeling, and answering an unknown number couldn't make it worse. "You changed your lock code," said a voice she recognized. Low. Unhurried. Good instinct. Selene gripped the phone. "How do you have this number? You should also change the secondary account, not just flag the transaction. The flag creates a record, but the account is still accessible." "How do you know about—" She stopped. Breathed. "Who are you, actually?" "I told you it was complicated." "You told me in a car. I'm telling you right now, if you've been in my apartment—" "I haven't been in your apartment." A pause that felt careful, considered. "I know who has." The cold feeling got colder. "What do you want?" she asked. "To give you information you don't have yet and won't like when you get it. About Adrian. About what Adrian has been doing with your foundation for the past 18 months. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car horn, distant, someone else's emergency. She sat down on the floor. There was nowhere else to sit. The chairs were still in a box, and put her back against the cabinet and stared at the ceiling. "Tell me," she said, "not over the phone." He said it without apology, without any sense that he understood this was infuriating. "Tomorrow evening, there's a restaurant on Keeler Street, Margot. 8 o'clock. I'll have a table." "You think I'm just going to—" "No," he said. "I think you're going to lie awake tonight wondering whether I'm right, and by tomorrow evening you'll have decided that not knowing is worse than knowing." She hated that he said it like he'd simply calculated the probability and arrived at the correct answer. She hated more that he was right. She went to Margot at 8 o'clock. The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have a sign outside. Just an address, burnished metal numbers on a black door. The understanding that if you needed to be told what this place was, you already weren't the clientele. Inside, warm light, tables spaced far enough apart for privacy, the specific quiet of money that didn't need to announce itself. Every table occupied, every face turning briefly toward her and then away. Cassian was already there. He stood when she approached, not the performative standing of a man doing what he'd been taught, but the automatic standing of someone for whom physical courtesy was so deeply ingrained it had lost the quality of a choice. He waited until she sat. He sat. He poured her water. She didn't thank him. She was working too hard to regulate her own heart rate. "Talk," she said. He looked at her across the table. This close, in this light, she could see things the rain had obscured. The old scar along his jaw. Barely visible, but there. The particular quality of his hands where they rested on the table. The right one slightly different from the left in a way that suggested repair rather than birth. He looked like a man who had survived a number of things and kept very precise track of how. Adrian Mercer has been using the Alistair Vale Foundation as a transit point for financial flows connected to Vivian Cross's parent company, he said. Vivian runs 4 luxury brands under a holding structure. On paper, the brands are profitable. In practice, approximately 60% of the revenue they report is fabricated. The real money comes from elsewhere and is laundered through the luxury retail invoicing. Your foundation's charitable disbursements, payments to legitimate nonprofits, to women's education organizations, to the entities your grandfather established, have been used as cover documentation to justify transfers that don't match any real charitable activity. He said all of it without a document in front of him, without looking away from her. Selene said nothing for a long time. She was aware of the water glass between her hands, of the warmth of the restaurant, of the specific terrible clarity of something you'd suspected in the back of your mind without letting yourself know you were suspecting it. "How long?" she said. "The first traceable transaction is 22 months ago, but the structure was probably set up before that, before we were married. The holding company precedes your marriage by 4 years. She thought about how he'd met her. Adrian, at a gallery opening she'd attended on behalf of the foundation, him appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of wine and that voice, that careful, gentle voice. She thought about how quickly it had moved, how she'd thought then that falling fast was a sign of something real, how she'd been so certain that the speed was evidence of certainty. "He married me," she said slowly, "to get access to the foundation." Cassian didn't look away. "That's the working theory. And when the federal investigation started, he needed an exit, someone to leave holding the documentation." "Me," she said. "Yes." She set down the water glass carefully. "So the divorce wasn't... He wasn't leaving me for Vivian. He was setting the stage. The divorce creates the narrative that you had autonomous control of the foundation, that decisions made about disbursements were yours alone. He's been removing his fingerprints from the operational documentation for the past 7 months. By the time federal investigators get far enough into the foundation's records to identify the irregularities, the paper trail points to a divorced woman with sole control and motive to cover financial mismanagement." Selene looked at the table, then at him. "Why are you telling me this?" He was quiet for a moment. She'd noticed he did this, used silence not as avoidance but as punctuation, as a way of distinguishing between things that deserved to be said quickly and things that didn't. "Because I've been investigating Adrian Mercer for 19 months, he said, "and because you are the only person in the structure of this fraud who is genuinely not part of it, and because—" He stopped. The pause was different from his usual pauses, more internal. Because I was in the position of knowing what was going to happen to you, and I made a choice about whether to let it happen. She studied his face. That's not a complete answer. No, he said, it's not. She should have pushed. She knew that, the way she knew about doors. Instead, she said, what do I do? Tonight, nothing. Tomorrow, you call your attorney and you ask him specifically about the foundation documentation irregularities he mentioned. Don't tell him what you know. Ask him what he knows. And after that, his eyes moved across her face. Not invasive, more the way you look at something you're trying to understand completely before you speak about it. After that, he said, we'll talk again. She went home. She lay on her mattress on the floor and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep until 3 in the morning, and even then it was shallow and interrupted, full of numbers and documents, and the specific memory of Adrian's face when the convoy had pulled away from the courthouse, the way it had changed when he'd recognized the car. He hadn't looked afraid. He'd looked recalculating. Then, she called her attorney the next morning. She asked about the foundation documentation. He told her, after a pause that lasted too long, that he'd been meaning to follow up on that there were aspects of the transfer records that he'd referred to a forensic accountant colleague, that he expected a preliminary report by end of week. She asked him directly, could these irregularities implicate her? He said he couldn't advise her definitively without the full report. She said, if you had to advise me right now, as your client, what would you tell me to do? He said, I would tell you to get a second attorney. She got a second attorney. A woman named Petra Hollis, who worked out of an office on the 31st floor of a glass tower downtown, and who had, according to the people who knew about such things, never lost a financial fraud defense case. Petra Hollis listened to everything Selene said with the focused attention of someone cataloging rather than sympathizing, asked 12 questions in rapid succession that Selene did not have all the answers to, and then said, you need to understand that if what you're describing is accurate, you're not only a potential witness, you're a potential target. Selene already knew that. What she didn't know yet was that 3 days later, an envelope would be slipped under her apartment door containing a single photograph, her coming out of Petra Hollis's building, taken from street level, the timestamp visible in the corner. Someone was watching her find her way out. And the next morning, when she checked her phone, there was a message from an unknown number that she already recognized, the photograph under your door. Do you still want to keep this in the legal lane? She sat on the floor of her kitchen, still no chairs, she kept forgetting the chairs, and held the phone and thought about what she was actually being asked, what it meant to say yes or no, what she was deciding, with whichever answer she gave, about who she was willing to become. She typed back, what's the other lane? 3 dots. A long pause, then, come to the gala. She typed, what gala? The Imperial Aurora. 3 weeks. You'll receive an invitation. Why? Because Adrian will be there. Because it's time for him to understand what he's dealing with. Selene stared at the message. Outside, the city was doing what it did. Noise and gray sky and the particular indifference of 8 million people, each inside their own emergency. She thought about the photograph, about 19 months of investigation, about the way Cassian had said I made a choice about whether to let it happen and stopped himself before finishing the sentence. She thought about Adrian's phone, the way he'd looked at it while her marriage ended. She typed, if I come to this gala, what are you asking me to be? The response took 4 minutes, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, someone they can't dismiss. She read it 3 times. Then she put the phone down on the kitchen floor, pulled her knees to her chest, and stayed very still for a long time, breathing through the particular weight of a decision she'd already made without admitting it. The invitation arrived 12 days later. It was hand-delivered, no return address. Ivory paper, her name in ink that had been written by an actual hand, which almost no one did anymore, and inside a single card, Imperial Aurora Hotel, Charity Gala, Saturday, November 14th, black tie. And below that, in different handwriting, smaller, more compressed, the writing of someone not accustomed to writing things down. Wear something they'll remember. She set the invitation on her windowsill and looked at it for 3 days. She told herself she was deciding. She told herself she was weighing consequences. She told herself a lot of things that weren't quite true. On the fourth day, she called her cousin Marcus and asked if he still had their grandmother's jewelry in storage. He said yes. He asked why. She said she needed the earrings. There was a silence on the line, the kind that contained a question Marcus was wise enough not to ask. Then he said, "Okay, I'll bring them Thursday." She hung up and looked at the invitation on the windowsill. Wear something they'll remember. The night before the gala, she stood in her bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Not with the anxious inventory she'd done before events with Adrian, checking for Adrian's specific criteria, cataloging herself against his preferences. Just looking. At the face she'd had since before any of this. At the lines around her eyes that were new, or that she was seeing newly. At the jaw she'd gotten from her mother, and the steadiness she'd gotten from somewhere she hadn't located yet. She thought about Petra Hollis saying, "You're not only a potential witness, you're a potential target." She thought about a photograph slipped under her door. She thought about a man stepping into rain. She opened her closet and took out the silver gown. In 7 hours, she was going to walk into a room full of people who had written her off. She was going to be standing next to the most dangerous man in Blackthorn City. And somewhere in that ballroom, Adrian Mercer was going to see her, really see her, for what felt like the first time. And he was going to understand that something had changed in a way he hadn't accounted for, and he was going to start making mistakes. She was counting on it. She just didn't know yet what those mistakes were going to cost. The dress fit the way things fit when they were made for a different version of you, and that version had better posture. Selene stood in the elevator of the Imperial Aurora E-Hotel and watched the numbers climb and breathed through her nose and told herself the tightness across her ribs was the boning in the bodice and not fear. The silver satin caught the elevator light and threw it back in fractured pieces. Her grandmother's diamonds were cold against her earlobes. She had done her own hair, up, severe, the way her mother used to wear it for events that required armor, and she had done it 3 times before it looked the way she wanted, which was not beautiful exactly, but composed, the way a person looks when they have decided something irrevocable and stopped second-guessing the decision. She had not eaten since noon. Her hands were steady. She was surprised by that. The elevator opened on the 42nd floor, and the sound hit her before the visual did, the specific orchestral blur of a live string quartet somewhere in the distance, the layered murmur of 200 conversations happening simultaneously at a volume calibrated to be heard without being understood, the crystalline percussion of champagne flutes touching. Then the light. Warm, amber, cascading from chandeliers that were less furniture than weather, filling the Imperial Aurora's grand ballroom with a glow that made everyone inside look like the best version of themselves, or the version they were paying to project. She stepped out of the elevator. Nobody noticed her yet. That was fine. That was the point of arriving before him. She took a glass of champagne from a passing tray, not to drink, just to have something in her hand, something between herself and the room, and moved along the perimeter, cataloging. The ballroom was enormous, maybe 180 feet from end to end, ceiling vaulted high enough that sound got lost up there and came back different. Round tables draped in white near the far end, a dance floor in the center that nobody was using yet, bar stations at 3 corners doing steady business. Along the east wall, floor-to-ceiling windows showed the nighttime city spread out below like a circuit board, all lit intersections and dark arteries. She found Marcus first. Her cousin was near the second bar, already holding his second drink based on his color, wearing a suit that was slightly too small in the shoulders because Marcus always ordered his suits before he went through a phase of working out and then kept them after. He saw her and blinked. "Selene," he came toward her. Don't make it a thing. I was going to say you look like Mom." That landed somewhere she wasn't prepared for. She covered it by taking a sip of champagne she didn't want. "How long have you been here?" 40 minutes. Adrian's already here." Marcus said it carefully, watching her face. "He's got a table near the windows. He's been holding court. You know how he gets when a deal comes through. He closed something this week, some infrastructure contract. He's been loud about it." "Who's with him?" "The usual, Hargrove from Mercer Capital, 2 of the city council contacts, and Vivienne." A pause. "She's wearing red." "Because of course she is." Selene looked across the room. She found them without difficulty. Adrian had always been someone you found without difficulty in a crowd. That was part of his specific gravity, the way he occupied space like it was owed to him. He was in profile, turned toward Hargrove, laughing at something with his whole body the way he did when he wanted someone to feel like they'd said the funniest thing in the room. Vivian was beside him, red dress, dark hair swept back, one hand resting on the table in a position that was artful in the specific way of someone who had practiced being artful. Selene watched them for exactly 4 seconds. Then she looked away. "Where's the foundation table?" "Southeast corner. I already checked in with Petra's contact, the one running the charity component tonight. We're listed as co-sponsors." Marcus lowered his voice. "Selene, what is actually happening tonight? You asked for Grandma's earrings and told me to wear my good suit, and you look like you're about to detonate something. I'm going to need you to stay near the foundation table and not approach Adrian under any circumstances tonight." "Why?" "Because if things go the way I think they're going to go, you being near him creates complications. Stay visible. Talk to the other Foundation representatives. Be charming. Do your thing." She looked at him steadily. "Can you do that?" Marcus studied her face for a long moment with the specific expression he'd had since they were children, that expression of calculating how much she was telling him versus how much she was protecting him from. Then, "Yeah, okay." He touched her arm briefly. "You're sure about whatever this is?" "No," she said honestly. "Go find the table." He went. She turned back to the room and waited. She felt it before she heard it. A shift in the room's atmospheric pressure, the way a crowd changes when something they were expecting to be unusual turns out to be more unusual than they'd anticipated. Conversation shortened, volume dipped. The string quartet, she could see them now, near the northeast corner, didn't stop playing, but the second violinist lost a note, recovered, continued with the particular mechanical focus of a professional pretending nothing had interrupted her. The ballroom doors at the north end were open. Cassian walked in like he owned the building and had simply not gotten around to telling the building yet. He was in black tonight, not charcoal, a black that was different from his men's black the way a sentence is different from punctuation, something in the cut and the weight of it that communicated preference rather than uniform. No tie again. He had that quality, in a room full of men in tuxedos, of being the only person who had dressed for exactly this occasion and no one else's idea of it. His hands were in his pockets. He was not scanning the room. He was walking toward a specific point as if he'd already mapped the space from a satellite feed and found it adequately arranged. That specific point, Selene realized, was her. 3 of his men had come in ahead of him. She identified them now, stationed near the entrances, near the bar, near the window wall. And 2 more came in behind, fanning out with the same practiced geometry she'd seen on the courthouse steps. Everyone saw it happening. No one moved to stop it. A man near the bar said something to the woman beside him in an undertone, and the woman turned to look and then looked away very quickly. Cassian stopped beside Selene. He looked at her once, the full vertical sweep, and then he looked at the room. "You came early," he said. "You said wear something they'd remember." "I did." He reached out and adjusted the strap of her gown where it had shifted slightly. A minimal contact, fingertips to fabric, efficient rather than intimate, but in the watching room it landed like a statement. "How are you?" "Ask me in an hour." Something moved in his expression, almost approval. "Fair enough?" He took a glass of water, not champagne, she noticed, not anything with alcohol, from a passing tray and turned with her to face the room. Not drawing attention to the attention they were receiving, just standing, side by side and letting the room understand what it was looking at. Selene felt the exact moment Adrian noticed them. She didn't look at him. She felt it the way you feel a change in temperature, sudden, specific, directional. Across the room, a laugh that had been building cut off approximately 2 syllables before its natural conclusion. A sentence Hargrove had been finishing went unfinished. She heard, at a distance, the sound of crystal contacting a hard surface. Brief, sharp, not quite a break. Vivian's wine glass. She was almost certain. She still didn't look. "He's seen us," she said quietly. "I know. What happens now?" "Now we have dinner and let him decide what to do with it." She did look at Cassian then, at the profile of his face against the city lights through the windows behind him. "You want him to make a move." I want him to show everyone in this room what he's capable of when he's threatened. He said it with complete equanimity. He can't help himself. That's always been his structural weakness. Selene considered this. You've studied him for 19 months, 22 now, and you already know what he's going to do tonight. He turned his head and looked at her, close enough that she was aware of the sound of the room as a thing separate from the two of them. I know what he's likely to do, he said. People surprise you sometimes. Is that a warning? It's a fact. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, then looked back at the room. Stay near me or near Marcus until I tell you otherwise. Don't approach Adrian. Don't let him separate you from a crowd. You think he'd try something here? I think a man who is watching everything he built start to come apart has a narrower emotional range than he used to. She wanted to ask what he meant by that. What specifically had started coming apart? What he'd done in the 3 weeks since the restaurant meeting? She'd had glimpses. Petra Hollis had mentioned with careful professional neutrality that a federal inquiry had made what she called unexpected early progress in the past 2 weeks. Marcus had said something about rumors in the investment community. Nothing concrete, just the particular quality of silence around Adrian's name in certain conversations that suggested something underground shifting. She hadn't asked Cassian directly. She was going to need to ask Cassian directly, but not here. Come on, he said. I have a table. Ma. His table was central. Of course it was. Not the power corner where Adrian had positioned himself. Not the charity tables along the south wall. Not the obscured mid-room placement of people who wanted to watch without being watched. Dead center. The table you saw the moment you oriented yourself in the room. The table that forced everyone else to be aware of it. 6 seats. Only 2 occupied, Selene and Cassian, with a space around it created by the instinctive geometry of 200 people all simultaneously deciding there was somewhere else they needed to be. Within 20 minutes, 3 people approached the table to speak to Cassian. Not socially, not the way people approach tables to exchange pleasantries and reconfirm their place in a hierarchy. These were the approaches of people with business, conducted quickly, in the space beside his chair, voices low enough that Selene heard tone and cadence but not words. A man in his 60s with the ruddy, weathered face of someone who spent time outdoors in conditions that weren't recreational. A woman, perhaps 40, dark suit, the precise posture of someone with a legal background. A younger man, 30, maybe, tight with nervous energy, who spoke too fast and left looking like he'd forgotten how to arrange his face normally. After the third one, Cassian turned back to Selene as if no interruption had occurred. Who are they? She asked. People with information. About Adrian. Among other things. He looked at her directly. There's something you need to know before tonight gets further along. Something in his tone changed the quality of the air between them. Tell me, she said. The federal inquiry into Adrian's company, it's been active for 11 months, not 3 weeks. My involvement and the information I've provided to certain parties predates our meeting at the courthouse by over a year. He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. I want you to know that. Selene looked at him. Why are you telling me now? Here. Because after tonight, things are going to move quickly, and I need you to understand the full architecture of what you're inside of before they do. You deserve that. She thought about this carefully, the cold clarity of it. When you put your coat over my shoulders, outside the courthouse, you already knew everything. Yes. You'd been watching me. I'd been watching Adrian. You were... He paused, and the pause had that different quality again, the internal one. You were a secondary concern that became a primary one. When? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her the way he had in the restaurant, that look of trying to understand something completely before speaking about it. When I saw what he was going to do to you, he said finally, not the fraud, the framing, the... He stopped. His jaw was slightly tighter than it had been. The specific care he'd taken to make it look like you. Selene was quiet. Around them, the ballroom continued its orchestrated noise, 200 people eating and performing and trading influence, none of it touching the particular silence that existed between her and this man at this table. You're angry about it, she said. Not a question. He looked at the table. Yes. Why? You didn't know me. No. He picked up his water glass. I knew enough. She wanted to press that. She was going to press that sometime, but not here. Not with what was coming and the specific set of his shoulders that told her he was tracking the room even while looking at her. Instead, what happens tonight that makes things move quickly? He set the glass down. Adrian is going to approach you before the end of the evening. You said don't let him separate me. I said don't let him separate you from a crowd. I didn't say avoid the conversation. He looked at her steadily. When he comes to you, I need you to let him say what he came to say. Which is what? He's going to try to gauge what you know. He's going to come in with a specific version of events, something conciliatory, maybe apologetic. He'll have practiced it. He's going to be looking for one thing. Whether you're a problem, he can still manage. And what do I tell him? Nothing. His voice was completely level. You listen. You give him nothing to read, and when he's done, you walk away. That's it? That's it. The conversation isn't for his benefit. It's for the people watching it. Selene understood, with the particular quality of understanding that arrives too late for comfort, that she was not the only person in this room who had thought carefully about how tonight was going to go. That the table placement, the timing, the three people with information, all of it was arranged. That she was inside something constructed, and Cassian had been building it for a long time before she arrived. She should have been angry about that. She examined the anger and found underneath it something else. Something she didn't have a clean name for. The specific relief of discovering that someone had been paying attention while you thought you were invisible. How many people in this room, she said slowly, are working for you? He almost smiled. Watching for me, not working for. How many? Enough. Adrian came for her at 10:47. She knew it was coming because Cassian's posture changed. A millimeter, barely perceptible. The specific stillness of someone who has decided to stop moving and start watching. She followed his gaze and found Adrian crossing the room toward them, alone. Vivian conspicuously absent, left at the table, Selene suspected, as a calculated move, remove the visible hostility, come in as a single point rather than a formation. He looked good, Adrian. She hated that she noticed it, and hated more that she noticed the noticing. He had the specific put-together quality of a man who had spent 4 hours telling himself he was in control of the evening. His color was slightly high, the champagne, the deal, the performance of confidence in front of his table, but he'd composed his expression into something that was almost casual. Almost. He stopped at the edge of their table. He didn't look at Cassian. He looked at Selene. You look well, he said. His voice was doing the thing, the half-octave drop. She heard it with a different anatomy now, like a sound she'd finally learned the source of. She said nothing. He shifted his weight slightly, registered the nothing, and recalibrated. I was hoping we might have a moment. If you're not... She's not available, Cassian said. Not loudly, the way you state a fact about weather. Adrian's eyes moved to him. Something happened in Adrian's face. Not fear exactly, more the expression of a man recalculating the degree of a problem he'd already been calculating. He and Cassian looked at each other for approximately 4 seconds. Then Adrian looked back at Selene. I thought we could speak privately. Clear the air. There's no air to clear, Selene said. The steadiness in her own voice surprised her. Selene, you had a lawyer present at our divorce proceedings whose fees you subsequently charged to a joint account that had already been classified as solely mine. She said it quietly, without heat. I don't think air is the problem. Something flickered in his expression, the calculation intensifying. I don't know where you're getting... I'm getting it from the documentation my attorney's forensic accountant found in your company's second-tier holding structure. She kept her voice even. The one connected to Vivian's brands. Dead silence at the table. Adrian's jaw was very controlled. You're confused about how that... Adrian. She looked at him with the full, focused attention she'd been conserving all evening. I know what you built. I know what you used the foundation for. I know what you were planning to do when the investigation got close enough. She picked up her champagne glass, still mostly full, she'd barely touched it, and held it in one hand, unhurried. I don't know what you came over here to tell me, but whatever it is, I'd think very carefully before finishing the sentence. The control in his jaw was costing him now. She could see it. You have no idea, he said, barely above a conversational volume, what you've gotten yourself into. Tell me. He leaned forward slightly. The man sitting next to you has killed people, Selene. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that literally. You're sitting here thinking he's protecting you, and you have no idea the kind of world you've... Adrian, it was Cassian. One word, said so quietly that it almost didn't register as an interruption. Adrian stopped. Cassian looked at him with an expression that Selene could not fully read, and she was beginning to think that was intentional, that Cassian's face was a thing he had learned to control the way other people controlled their voices. You drove here tonight, correct? Adrian stared at him. What? The silver Maserati. Valet. You gave them a key card, not a physical key. Cassian tilted his head slightly. You should ask them to pull it around before the end of the evening. The transmission has been making a sound you probably haven't noticed yet from inside the car. Better to know before you're on the highway. The color drained from Adrian's face so completely and so quickly that it was almost biological to watch, like something coring out. It was not a threat about a transmission. Everyone at the table understood that. Selene held very still. Adrian straightened up. He looked at Selene with an expression she had never seen on him in 3 years of marriage. Stripped of the voice, stripped of the calculation, something raw and ugly underneath that she thought might be the closest she'd ever seen to his actual face. You think he's saving you, he said. You'll figure out he's using you, same as everyone else in his life. He walked away. Selene breathed. In through her nose, slow, complete. She set the champagne glass down. What he said, she said without looking at Cassian, about using people. That's a reasonable concern, Cassian said. She turned to look at him. That's not a denial. No. He held her gaze. It's not. She sat with that. The orchestra had shifted to something slower, sadder, and the room's volume had risen again with the comfortable noise of people who had decided whatever had just happened at the center table wasn't their immediate problem. Outside the windows, the city went on being the city. I need to know, she said, what you get out of this. He was quiet for a moment. I'm taking Adrian Mercer apart because he's been moving money through my city's financial infrastructure without arrangement or permission, and because 3 of his transactions in the past 6 months have created problems for entities I'm responsible for. That's the business reason. And the other reason? He looked at the table, then at her. I told you, I made a choice about whether to let it happen. That's not an answer. It's the most honest one I have right now, he said. And I don't say things I'm not certain of. Selene looked at him for a long time. He let her look. Didn't deflect, didn't perform anything, just sat in it with the particular patience of a man who had learned that most things resolved themselves if you were still enough to let them. Okay, she said finally. Okay, what? Okay, I'm going to keep operating on incomplete information and trust that you'll fill in the rest when you said you would. She picked up the champagne glass. But I want the rest. You'll get it. She drank. Across the room, she could see Adrian back at his table, Vivian leaning toward him, one hand on his arm in the specific way of someone trying to manage a situation. Adrian wasn't looking at Vivian. He was looking at his phone. His thumb was moving fast. She thought about what Cassian had said. A man who is watching everything he built start to come apart has a narrower emotional range than he used to. She thought about what she'd just done. Said those things to him, in this room, in front of everyone watching, and then sat back and let him walk away. He was going to do something. She could feel it. The message he was sending on his phone right now, the speed of his thumb, the set of his shoulders. She'd given him the shape of what she knew, and a man like Adrian didn't receive that kind of information and sit still. She leaned toward Cassian slightly. He's sending a message. I know. He wasn't looking at Adrian. His phone is being copied in real time. I'll know in 20 minutes who he contacted. She stared at him. You hacked his phone. His communications infrastructure, yes, 14 months ago. She processed this. And you've been building this whole time. Construction takes time, he said simply. And the thing you're building, the thing that ends tonight. What is it? He turned to look at her. His expression had shifted, not dramatically, just a degree. Something more present in it than usual. The end of his ability to operate in this city, he said. The evidence in the hands of people who will act on it. And he stopped. And his jaw was very slightly tight. The same quality she'd seen when he'd said the specific care he'd taken to make it look like you. And his understanding, Cassian said quietly, that he made a mistake, a specific one, that he should not have touched what was yours and called it collateral. The way he said it, not with heat. The absence of heat was what made it land the way it did. Selene looked at him and felt something shift in her chest, not the fear-adjacent feeling that had lived there since the courthouse, but something more disorienting, something she was going to need to think about later when there was a later. Cassian, he looked at her. Thank you, she said, for the coat, that first day. Something in his expression, not a smile, not quite, but the closest thing to openness she'd seen on his face. It was raining, he said. That's not why. A beat. No, he said, it's not. And then Marcus was at her shoulder, pale, his hand gripping her arm with more force than he realized. Selene! His voice was stripped down, no social layer left on it. Selene, something's wrong. 2 men near the service exit. They showed up maybe 10 minutes ago. They're not staff. I checked the credential list. They're not on it. Cassian was already standing. He wasn't moving fast. Still that same controlled pace. But his hand came to Selene's shoulder with a pressure that meant stay, and his eyes were moving across the room with a precision she hadn't seen before. A different kind of attention, something colder and more operational than anything he'd shown her tonight. Marcus, he said, without looking at Marcus. Get to the foundation table. Sit down. Don't move from the chair. Marcus looked at Selene. Selene looked at Cassian's profile, at the way his jaw had set, at the hand he'd brought to the interior of his jacket and then moved away from again, slowly, deliberately, a decision being made and temporarily reversed. What's happening? She said. He looked at her then, just for a second, the full weight of his attention, stripped of everything social, everything managed. She saw, very briefly, what was underneath all of it. Stay beside me, he said. Don't stop moving for any reason. And whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, his voice was completely level. Don't react to what you see. She gripped his arm. Cassian, I need you to trust me right now. Not later. Right now. Across the ballroom, near the service corridor entrance on the east wall, a door opened that should not have opened. And the 2 men Marcus had described came through it, and behind them, 3 more, and none of them were wearing the uniform of the Imperial Aurora Hotel's staff. And one of them, Selene realized with a cold that went all the way through, was looking directly at her. Not at Cassian, at her. Whatever Adrian had sent on his phone 12 minutes ago, this was the answer. And there was no version of the next 10 minutes that looked anything like the evening she had planned. The first thing Selene noticed was that Cassian's men moved before he said anything. Not a signal she could see. Not a word or a gesture. Something else. Some frequency she wasn't calibrated to receive. The specific vocabulary of people who had worked together long enough that language became redundant. The man near the bar straightened and drifted left. The one by the entrance rotated his position by 6 inches and suddenly wasn't silhouetted against the light anymore. Small adjustments, surgical, the kind that looked like nothing to anyone who wasn't already watching. She was watching. Her hand was still on Cassian's arm. She could feel the muscle underneath the jacket, the complete stillness of it, the particular stillness of something coiled rather than relaxed. Don't look at them directly, he said, barely moving his mouth. Keep your eyes on the room. She looked at the room. The orchestra was still playing. The string quartet had shifted into something Viennese, something meant to be backdrop, and most of the 200 people in the Imperial Aurora's ballroom were still inside the pleasant fiction of a charity gala, still eating, still drinking, still performing the careful social mathematics of Blackthorn's elite. The disruption at the East Wall service entrance hadn't registered yet. It was still contained, still in the narrow margin between what was happening and what people had decided was happening. That margin was shrinking. How many? She said. 5 that I can see. At least 2 more I can't. His hand was at her back now, light, directional. There's a corridor behind the northeast bar station. We're going to walk to it. Normal pace. Marcus, my man at the south table will cover Marcus. Walk. She walked. Normal pace was the hardest instruction she'd ever followed. Normal pace while her pulse was doing something architectural to her throat, while the silver satin felt suddenly wrong, too visible, too much like wearing a target. She kept her chin level. She breathed through her nose. She watched, in her peripheral vision, one of the 5 men near the service entrance begin to move through the outer edge of the crowd toward the center of the room, toward where they'd been sitting. They were no longer sitting there. Cassian steered her behind the northeast bar station and into the service corridor with a pressure so minimal it was almost telepathic. The door swung shut behind them, and the ballroom sound became muffled, replaced by the clinical noise of a working kitchen 20 feet further down. Clattering, voices, the slam of a refrigeration unit door. The corridor was narrow, white-painted concrete, fluorescent lighting that made everything look like evidence. One of Cassian's men was already there, not one she'd seen in the ballroom. Younger, late 20s, dark, with a face that had a broken nose history and eyes that were doing the same thing Cassian's eyes did, that constant environmental cataloging. He said something in a language she didn't recognize, and Cassian responded in the same language, 3 words, flat and fast. Then the man held out a phone. Cassian looked at the screen. Something happened in his face, small, controlled, but she was close enough to see it. The specific expression of a person receiving information that lands in the category of already suspected but still damaging to confirm. "What is it?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the phone for 2 more seconds and then handed it back. "Cassian. The message Adrian sent." He looked at her. His voice was level. "It wasn't to the men at the door." She waited. "It was to the federal contact inside the investigation, the one who's been managing the inquiry's timeline." He watched her face carefully as he said the next part. "The contact who has been, for the past 8 months, selectively delaying the evidence forwarding schedule." Selene's brain processed this in stages, the way cold arrives in stages. Not all at once, but moving from the outside in. "There's someone inside the investigation who's working for Adrian?" "Yes." He said it without inflection. "I knew there was a delay mechanism. I didn't know who until 14 minutes ago." "Who is it?" He was quiet for a beat. That internal quality again. Worse this time. "Deputy Director Harlan Frost. He runs the Financial Crimes Division." A pause. "He's also, as of approximately 9 minutes ago, aware that I have the full transaction record and the communication logs between himself and Adrian going back 11 months. She stared at him. Which means Adrian knows that I know, and Frost knows, and the men at the service entrance aren't here for me." He held her gaze. "They're here because Frost has the authority to issue a detention order for a material witness in an active federal investigation, and he has just issued one." The fluorescent light buzzed once above them. Somewhere in the kitchen, something metallic fell, and someone swore in rapid Spanish. Selene felt the cold complete its arrival. "A detention order. For me." "For you," he said, "framed as protective custody. In practice, I disappear into federal holding while Frost manages what I know and don't know and makes sure the evidence trail gets buried with me attached to it." She heard her own voice saying it, factual and distant, like she was describing someone else's catastrophe. "That's the move. Adrian tells Frost I know about the Foundation. Frost issues the order. They have me before I can get the information to anyone who can act on it." Cassian said nothing, which was confirmation. "How long do we have?" "Before they secure the corridor exits, 8 minutes, maybe less." She looked at the white concrete wall, at the fluorescent light, at the specific geometry of having walked into something that had just changed shape around her. She thought about Petra Hollis on the 31st floor of a glass tower, about the forensic accountant's preliminary report, about the evidence she'd spent 3 weeks helping to compile without fully understanding that it had a guardian who was supposed to protect it and had been feeding it to the enemy instead. She thought about the photograph under her door, how long they'd been watching her. She thought about Cassian, 19 months of work, 22 months, all the architecture of it, and she thought about the thing he'd said that she hadn't finished processing, the thing about the men at the door not being for him. If Frost was Adrian's protection, if Frost had the authority to issue federal orders, if this had been the contingency plan all along, something hit her. Cold, specific, arriving too fast. "Cassian," her voice changed. "If Frost has been managing the timeline, if Adrian knew you were building this case..." She stopped. The sentence was too large. "How much of what you've built has Frost already seen?" The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. 3 seconds was too long. "How much?" she said again. He looked at her. He did not look away. She had learned to read the things his face refused to do, and what it refused to do right now was reassure her. "The primary evidence packet," he said carefully, "was segmented. Frost would have access to the federal-facing portions. The documentation I've compiled independently. Is it safe?" Another pause. "My secure archive is maintained outside any infrastructure Frost can access." His jaw tightened slightly. However, the two intermediary sources who were scheduled to testify to the federal side, Cassian, received contact from Frost's office this afternoon. One has gone unreachable. The other has formally recanted his preliminary statement. The corridor felt smaller. Selene counted her breaths. 1, 2. The specific discipline of staying functional inside a collapsing structure. So the testimony is gone. Those two witnesses, yes. Which means the federal case has a significant evidentiary gap that Frost will exploit to stall the indictment. He said it with the controlled flatness of a man who had run the calculation before she asked, and already knew the result. The financial transaction records still exist. The communication logs between Adrian and Frost still exist. But without witness testimony to contextualize the records for a jury, the prosecution has a documentation case, not a narrative one. And a documentation case without narrative takes how long? 18 months to 2 years to build back up to the indictment threshold. She put her back against the wall. The concrete was cold through the satin. She looked at the ceiling, fluorescent tube, one of them flickering at the far end, casting the corridor in a rhythm of near dark and harsh white that was doing something unpleasant to her already unpleasant state of mind. 18 months. 2 years. Adrian walking free, Vivian walking free, Frost walking free. All of them watching the clock and managing the delay while the evidence sat in a federal archive going nowhere. And Selene, "The detention order," she said. "If they take me into custody tonight, you have rights that complicate what they can do. Petra Hollis is your attorney of record. She'll have you out within—" "That's not what I'm asking." She looked at him. "If they take me tonight, what happens to your independent archive? The communication logs? The transaction records?" His expression shifted. She saw it. The thing he hadn't said yet. "Cassian, what happens to it?" "It's contingency protected," he said. "In the event of—" He stopped. Started again with the specific precision of someone choosing each word as load-bearing. "In the event of my detention or incapacitation, the archive transfers to a secondary holder, automatically." "Who's the secondary holder?" He was quiet. "Who?" she said. "Petra Hollis," he said. "She became the secondary holder 6 days ago." Selene stared at him. "You put it with my attorney. She's the cleanest channel to prosecution that doesn't run through Frost's division. She has the client privilege protection and the legal standing to—" "You put it with my attorney without telling me." "Yes." The word landed in the corridor and stayed there. She breathed, once, twice. The flickering fluorescent light did its rhythm, bright, near dark, bright, near dark. Somewhere in the kitchen, muffled now, the string quartet had changed pieces, something faster, and it reached her as a pressure rather than a sound, the bass notes finding her through the wall. "Is there anything else," she said, "that you've done that directly involves me, that you haven't told me?" The pause was exactly long enough to mean yes. She closed her eyes. "Tell me," she said. "All of it. Right now." He looked at her with something in his expression that was the closest thing to discomfort she'd ever seen on his face. Not guilt exactly, more the expression of a person who has been operating with a precision they believed in and is now standing in front of the person most affected by that precision and finding the vantage point uncomfortable. "The Foundation's documentation irregularities," he said. "When they were first flagged to me through the financial investigation, I had access to the original filing records before any legal counsel was involved. I made certain that the most damaging documents, the ones that would have placed you in the most direct frame, were not among the materials forwarded to the federal inquiry's initial filing." She opened her eyes. "You suppressed evidence. I redirected the order of discovery. The documents still exist. They're in my archive. But they were not the first thing Frost's team saw, which meant the frame they built around the irregularities did not start with your culpability." "Which means," she said slowly, that the portrait of me as the primary suspect was never as solid as Adrian intended. Yes, he held her gaze, because I interfered with the initial framing before it calcified. She was quiet for a moment. When you say you made a choice about whether to let it happen, yes, that's what you meant. Part of it. What's the other part? He looked at the wall beside her head, then back at her. I came to the courthouse because I wanted to see you in person, he said. After 22 months of a file and a photograph and indirect information, I told myself it was operational, that I needed to assess the situation directly. A beat. It wasn't operational. The corridor held very still. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it in a part of her mind she was going to have to access later, when there was a later, when they were not standing in a service corridor with 8 minutes, fewer now, maybe 6, before men with federal orders closed the exits. Okay, she said. Okay, he said, not asking what she meant, just receiving it. What do we do? He looked at his man who had been standing at the far end of the corridor with the professional courtesy of someone pretending not to hear a conversation he definitely heard. Some exchange passed between them, minimal, efficient. The man nodded and moved toward the kitchen door. We go up, Kanads, Cassian said. Up. The service elevator at the end of this corridor goes to the roof access level. There's a secondary exit through the mechanical floor that doesn't run through the main lobby. You've already mapped this building. I mapped this building 8 days ago. Of course you did. She pushed off the wall. The satin dress made a sound against the concrete. Marcus? Already handled. He's being moved through the north exit right now. Cassian was already moving down the corridor, his pace measured. She kept beside him. Petrohalis has been notified. She's aware of the detention order and has already filed a preemptive motion challenging the basis. In the middle of the night, she was already on standby. You planned for this. I planned for the possibility of this. He hit the elevator call button without breaking stride. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. He looked at her. Something passed across his face that was almost something human and unguarded. No, he said quietly. I suppose not. The elevator arrived. They stepped in. The doors closed. The mechanical floor was exactly what it sounded like. Low-ceilinged, dense with HVAC equipment and junction boxes, and the industrial skeleton of a 42-story hotel. It was loud with the sound of systems, fans, and compressors, and the deep vibration of something large moving water through pipes. The light was emergency grade, orange-tinged, every surface painted industrial gray or not painted at all. Cassian's man was waiting at the stairwell door that opened onto the roof access. He said something. Cassian's posture changed. What? Selene said. Cassian turned to her. There are 2 men on the roof already. She stared at him. How? The building has 3 roof access points. We covered 2. They found the 3rd. He looked at his man. Something passed between them that she read as a problem without a clean solution. How many? 2 confirmed, possibly a 3rd near the antenna array. Cassian was quiet for 2 seconds. Then he made a decision she could see him making, watched his face go through the specific process of assessing variables and landing on the one that cost the most, but cost it in the right direction. Give me your comm, he said to his man. The man handed over an earpiece. Cassian put it in. We go up. There are 2 men. We go up, he said again, flatly. Stay behind me. If I tell you to get down, you get down immediately. No pause, no question. Understood? She looked at him. Understood. He reached into his jacket. She'd known it was there, had been aware of it as a shape beneath the fabric all evening, something she'd been peripherally conscious of, the way you're peripherally conscious of a drop when you're standing near a ledge. He checked it with the automatic efficiency of a person for whom the action had been repeated enough times to bypass conscious thought. Then he looked at her. Stay close, he said. I'm close, she said. He pushed open the stairwell door. The roof of the Imperial Aurora Hotel was 42 stories above Blackthorn City, and from up here, the city looked the way cities look from a height, organized, indifferent, its lights a map of other people's emergencies. The wind was sharp. The kind that October produced when it wanted you to understand that November was close and not negotiating. Selene stepped out of the stairwell into it and felt the cold hit the bare skin above her gown's neckline like a flat hand. She saw the first man immediately. He was near the parapet wall on the east side, 40 feet away, and he saw them at the same moment. He wasn't in tactical gear, civilian clothes, which was Frost's fingerprint, plausible deniability, federal contractors rather than uniformed agents. He had something in his hand that she processed as radio before she processed it as weapon. And by the time she'd processed it as both, Cassian was already moving, not toward the man, to the right, toward the antenna array, and she understood suddenly, the possible third, the one at the array, and she was moving before she'd decided to move, keeping the 3-foot gap behind Cassian that he'd positioned her in before the door opened, tracking his movement the way you track something you've agreed to follow and can't afford to lose. What happened next took approximately 11 seconds. She replayed it for months afterward, and it never got slower. It stayed 11 seconds, each one dense and specific, the way time gets when your body has decided it's going to remember everything. Cassian reached the antenna array, and the third man was there, closer than expected, 5 feet, and there was no space for what Cassian had planned, whatever that was. The geometry had collapsed. The man grabbed for something at his belt, and Cassian closed the distance between them with a single movement that was nothing like anything Selene had seen outside of a movie screen, something below the level of drama, purely mechanical, the application of leverage and momentum, and a knowledge of the human body that she was going to have to stop thinking about, because what it implied about the context in which that knowledge was acquired was too large for right now. The man went down. Cassian turned back to her, breathing elevated for the first time, and said, "Down." And she was already down because from somewhere on the east side of the roof, there was a sound she recognized from movies but had never heard in person. And it was different from movies, more mundane and more horrifying simultaneously, and something hit the antenna housing above her head, and she felt the impact through the structure rather than heard it. Then she heard it, 3 more in rapid succession. Not at her. At where Cassian's man from the stairwell was now engaging the east side contractor, moving across the roof in a low diagonal that covered distance while presenting the smallest possible profile. And the sound of it, the mechanical back and forth of 2 people doing something she had no language for, was the worst thing she'd ever listened to while crouched behind metal housing with her hands flat on a concrete roof. Then silence. Actual silence, or as close as 42 stories of wind would allow. Cassian was beside her. His hand was on her back. "Okay?" he said. "No," she said honestly. "Can you stand?" She stood. Her hands were shaking, not the fine tremor she'd had at the courthouse, but a full structural shake, her whole body rearranging itself around the adrenaline it had just produced and had nowhere to put. She looked at her hands. "That's normal?" Cassian said. Not unkindly. "I know it's normal," she said. "It's still happening." He was looking at her with that full attention quality, scanning her the way his men scanned environments, assessing, cataloging. "You're not hit." "I'm not hit." "Then we need to move. Now." He guided her toward the west parapet, away from the east side where his man was already engaged in what she was deliberately not looking at. On the street below, she could see them from the roof edge. 3 vehicles were double parked outside the hotel's main entrance. More of Frost's people. The lobby was compromised. "The secondary exit," she started, "also compromised." His jaw was tight. "Someone walked them through the building plan." She stared at him. "How? This was you mapped this. Someone on my side walked them through," he said. Very quietly. She heard what he wasn't saying. "One of your people." He didn't answer. He was looking at the street below with an expression she couldn't read, but that contained, she thought, something she hadn't seen in him before. Not anger, something beneath anger, something that had been there longer and was showing through the surface now that the surface had taken a hit. She thought about the thing he'd said to her. "People surprise you sometimes." She'd thought it was about Adrian. It wasn't about Adrian. "Who?" she said. He shook his head slightly. "I'll know in the next hour." Does it change what we do right now?" "No." A beat. "Everything changes after. Right now, no." His earpiece crackled. He listened to it. His expression didn't change, but his body did. Some very small update to the tension in his shoulders, the kind that meant the information was bad, and he was deciding how to sequence telling her. "What?" she said. "The archive," he said. The word landed wrong. What about the archive? He turned to face her fully. The city behind him, the wind, the orange light from the streets 42 floors below, making strange work of the shadows on his face. He looked at her, and she understood before he spoke that whatever the next sentence was, it was going to be the sentence that divided her experience of this night into before and after. "Someone accessed it 40 minutes ago," he said. "The independent archive. The communication logs between Adrian and Frost, the transaction records, everything I've built for 22 months. He paused. "They didn't just access it. They corrupted the primary file structure, the core documentation, the evidence that ties Adrian to Frost, that makes the case survivable without the witnesses. Is it gone?" she said. "The primary copy is gone." She felt it like a physical thing, not fear, something past fear, something that lived on the other side of it, where you'd already passed through fear and arrived in the terrain that existed after you ran out of it. "Petra Hollis," she said, "the secondary holder. Her firm's server was accessed through the same breach at roughly the same time." His voice was completely controlled. "Same corruption method. Someone knew both locations." Another pause. The hardest one yet. "Which means they knew that I'd moved it to Petra as a contingency. Which means they knew your contingency before you executed it," she said. "Yes." The wind pushed at the satin of her dress. Below, the city went on doing what it did. 22 months. All of it. Every document, every communication log, every trace of what Adrian had done and what Frost had covered. Gone. Corrupted. The witnesses recanted, the archive destroyed, Frost's detention order still active, and somewhere in this building a person who had sat inside Cassian's operation for long enough to know where every piece of it lived and had waited for exactly the right moment to take it all apart at once. "We have nothing," she said. He said nothing, which was the same as saying yes. She looked at the city, at all those lights, all those other emergencies, none of them this one. She thought about her grandmother's earrings, cold against her neck. She thought about signing a divorce paper with a pen that was almost out of ink. She thought about the mattress on the floor of an apartment that someone had entered and rearranged by millimeters while she was at work, and the cold feeling she'd had standing in that kitchen, and how naive that cold feeling seemed from here. She thought about what Cassian had said. "I was in the position of knowing what was going to happen to you, and I made a choice about whether to let it happen. And now everything he'd built to stop it was gone, and the men who had planned it all were still intact, and she was standing on a roof in a silver dress with shaking hands and nowhere to go." She turned to face him. "You said 22 months, she said. "Yes. Documents, communications, transaction records. You know every detail of what Adrian and Frost built together." "Yes." "It's in the archive because you put it there from memory, from your own investigation." He was looking at her steadily, listening. "Then it still exists," she said. "It exists in here." She touched her own temple, then looked at him. "In you. Everything you found, everything you documented, it exists because you found it. The archive being gone doesn't make the underlying truth gone." He was quiet for a moment. "Rebuilding the documentation," he said carefully. "From source. Going back to the original transactions, the communication pathways, reconstructing the chain. How long? Months. If we're lucky. If the sources are still accessible. If Frost doesn't. What's the fastest path?" He looked at her. "The fastest path is something we can't use." "Tell me anyway." He was quiet for a long moment, the wind moving between them. Then, "There's a transaction record that neither Frost's team nor my archive team would have flagged, because it doesn't run through any of the standard channels. It runs through the Foundation." He held her gaze. "Your Foundation. The original grant documentation. The disbursement records from 18 months ago. The specific transfers that show the money going in through a legitimate charity channel and out through the original paper records," she said. "The physical files. My grandfather kept physical files. Everything the Foundation ever processed, every transaction, every disbursement, Marcus has them. He's had them since my parents died. He kept them in storage because I couldn't." She stopped. Cassian's expression changed. She saw the shift, the precise quality of a person who has just watched the thing they needed most walk back into the room. Where's the storage? 40 minutes outside the city, a climate-controlled unit. Marcus has the code. Her mind was moving fast, reorganizing, finding the path. If the physical records are there, if the paper trail from the original disbursements is intact, that's Adrian's handwriting on the authorization signatures. That's the direct link. That's survivable, Cassian said, if we get there before Frost does. Does Frost know about the physical records? I don't know what Frost knows anymore. He said it with a controlled flatness that contained, she thought, the full weight of what it meant to have a breach inside your own operation. I don't know who told them about the archive. I don't know what else they were told. He looked at her. Marcus needs to get to that storage unit. Tonight. Before morning. Can you reach him? My man who moved him out of the building, yes. He was already moving back toward the stairwell, recalibrating. But Marcus needs to understand what he's going into. If Frost has been told about the Foundation connection, there may already be people watching that unit. Selene was walking beside him, the shaking in her hands reducing now, metabolized into something more useful. Then we go too. Selene, it's my foundation. It's my grandfather's records. And Marcus is my family. She looked at him directly, no negotiation in it. We go too. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he nodded once. There's something else, he said. They reached the stairwell door. He stopped with his hand on the handle and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet. Not the controlled competence, not the careful distance, but something more exposed than either. The person inside my operation who gave them the archive locations. I don't know who it is yet, but until I do... He stopped. You don't know who you can trust, she said. I know who I trust, he said carefully. I don't know who else has been turned. He held the door handle and looked at her with the full weight of something he was deciding to say or not say, and then he said it. I need to know that you're not going to run from this, that you understand what you're inside of now, and you're choosing to stay inside it. She looked at him, at the scar along his jaw, at the hands that knew things she didn't have language for, at the face of a man who had spent 22 months building something meticulous and devastating and had just watched someone tear it apart from the inside, and who was standing in a service stairwell on a rooftop and asking her the one question that had no tactical component, that was just human. Just human. I'm not running, she said. He opened the door. And somewhere below them, on a floor she couldn't identify, a sound that didn't belong to the building's infrastructure moved through the structure. Footsteps, multiple, coordinated, coming up rather than down. Cassian heard it at the same moment she did. His body changed. That coiled quality. The complete cessation of anything not operational. He looked at her, and in his expression was the confirmation of the thing she'd already understood. Whoever had been inside his operation hadn't just given them the archive. They gave them the location. That was the sentence Cassian hadn't finished, and Selene completed it in her own head as the footsteps below them resolved into something specific. Not one person, not two, the specific rhythm of a coordinated entry team moving up a stairwell with the practiced patience of people who knew their target had nowhere to go. Cassian pulled her back from the door. Not roughly, but completely. Roof again, he said. We just came from the roof. The west face. There's a maintenance ladder on the exterior. Goes down to the 38th floor mechanical balcony. He was already moving. It's a 12-foot drop from the base of the ladder to the balcony railing. Can you do that? She looked at him, at the silver satin dress, at her heels, which she had been wearing for 4 hours, and which had done nothing to earn her trust. In this? Take the shoes off. She reached down without breaking stride, unstrapped both heels, held them in one hand, and kept moving. The concrete was brutally cold through her stockings. She didn't register it as a problem. The roof again. Wind, orange light. The city spread below like a thing that didn't care. Cassian moved to the west parapet with a certainty that confirmed he'd walked this specific path before. Maybe more than once. The kind of certainty that came from having planned an exit before you needed one. She followed him to the edge and looked over. The maintenance ladder was painted gray and bolted to the exterior wall, running down from a metal anchor plate at the roofline. Below it, about 12 feet of air, and then the 38th floor mechanical balcony, a narrow concrete lip with a steel railing, 4 feet wide at most, running the length of the building's west face, 12 feet, in stockings. She looked at it for exactly the amount of time she could afford, which was 2 seconds. "Go," Cassian said. She went. She got her hands on the top rung and went over the parapet edge, and the cold hit her all at once. The full exposure of being on the outside of a building 42 floors up. The wind trying to get between her and the ladder. The city enormous and indifferent below her. Her stockings caught on the metal, and she registered the catch as data rather than sensation, and moved past it, rung by rung, the satin dress wrapping around her legs in the wind and making each step a negotiation. She reached the base of the ladder, 12 feet. She looked down at the balcony railing. Steel, 4 inches of clearance on each side. She was going to have to drop and land on the railing or the balcony surface, and neither option was generous about margin for error. "Drop straight," Cassian said from above her. He'd come down the ladder behind her with a speed she hadn't tracked, was now at the rung above the base, close enough that she could feel the presence of him even without looking. "Don't reach for the railing. Drop straight down and bend your knees on contact. And if I miss, you won't miss. Drop straight." She dropped straight. The impact was brutal. Not wrong. Her feet hit the balcony surface cleanly, both feet, but the force of it traveled up through her legs and into her hips with a violence that the silver satin did nothing to absorb, and she went forward onto her hands, and the concrete took skin off both palms in one clean stroke. She registered it as data. She stood up. Cassian landed beside her half a second later. Absorbed the impact with bent knees, was upright and moving before she'd fully processed that he'd landed. He looked at her hands, the brief assessing scan. "Can you use them?" She looked at her palms, blood, not much, the kind that stings rather than frightens. She closed her hands into fists. It hurt with a specific clarity that was almost useful. Yes. He moved to the balcony door, a heavy fire-rated steel door meant for maintenance access, not public use. It had a mechanical lever handle with no exterior keypad. He had it open in 11 seconds using something from his jacket interior that she didn't look at directly. They went through. The 38th floor was residential, the Imperial Aurora's private suites, the ones that didn't show up on the standard booking interface, the ones that started at a number per night that Selene had only ever seen referenced obliquely in financial documents. The corridor was carpeted in something dense and dark. Wall sconces turned to a late evening dim, the sound of the building's systems barely audible through the silence. Empty. Everyone at the gala, 44 floors below. Cassian had his phone out. He was reading something, moving at pace, and she stayed beside him and watched his face rather than the corridor because his face would tell her faster than anything else if the corridor became a problem. "Marcus is out," he said without looking up. "He's 40 minutes from the storage facility." "Does he know what he's looking for?" "My man briefed him." A pause. "He also knows he might not be alone when he gets there." Selene thought about Marcus, her cousin with the too small suit and the second drink, and the expression of calculating how much she was protecting him from. She thought about him driving 40 minutes outside the city in the middle of the night to retrieve physical files from a storage unit that might be watched by people who had already corrupted 22 months of work. "He'll do it," she said, more to herself than to Cassian. "I know." They reached the elevator bank. Cassian pressed the call button and stood back from the doors, one step to the left. Not directly in front of the opening, she noticed. She moved to mirror him without being told. The elevator arrived. Empty. They got in. "Who knew about the contingency?" she said, as the doors closed. "The archive transfer to Petra. How many people?" 3 people in my operation had that information." His jaw was set. "One of them is the breach." "Can you narrow it?" "I've been narrowing it for the past 40 minutes. He looked at the elevator display rather than her. The breach accessed the archive at 9:47. At 9:47, 2 of those 3 people were in positions I can verify. Physical locations confirmed by multiple witnesses. He paused. The 3rd was running communications from an off-site location. "Who is it?" He was quiet for 3 seconds. "His name is Davin Rice. He's been with me for 6 years. She waited. "He has a daughter," Cassian said. 8 years old. She has a medical condition that's been managed, controlled, but expensive. 3 months ago, the treatment protocol changed. New medication, substantially higher cost. His voice was flat, but she heard something underneath it that was not flat at all. Adrian's corporate structure includes a pharmaceutical distribution subsidiary. The new medication his daughter needs. That subsidiary controls the distribution contract for the Northeast region. Selene closed her eyes for 1 second. Adrian found his pressure point. Someone found it. Adrian, Frost, the people they use. The distinction doesn't matter now. He looked at the display. Devon would have believed he had no choice. He probably told himself it was limited, contained, that he'd given them just enough to... He stopped. "You're not angry at him?" she said. He looked at her. "I'm angry at everyone who made that the situation," he said. "Devon's the instrument. The people who built the instrument..." He stopped himself again. The elevator slowed. Lobby floor. He hit the button for the parking structure, 2 levels below. The elevator resumed its descent. "When this is over," she said carefully. "His daughter's medication will be handled," Cassian said, before she'd finished the sentence. That was never the problem. She looked at him. At the profile of his face in the elevator's light, at the specific set of it. Not cold. She'd learned to read the difference now. Not cold, but compressed. Everything turned inward and running fast and contained. A man doing 3 things simultaneously and showing none of them on his face except to someone who had spent enough hours watching it to know what compressed looked like. "You're building a plan," she said. "I've been building it since the roof." "Tell me, the physical records at Marcus's storage unit, if they're intact, if they contain what I think they contain, they're admissible. Original documents, physical signatures, the Foundation's processing records. It's not the full case, but it's a case." He looked at her. "But we need more than admissibility. We need delivery. Frost controls the federal channel. The evidence goes to Frost's division, it disappears. Then we go around Frost. Frost has spent 11 months making sure around doesn't exist. There has to be." "State level," he said. "There's a state attorney general's office that has been circling the periphery of Adrian's operation for 7 months. They don't have jurisdiction over the federal component, but they have jurisdiction over the Foundation. The Alistair Vale Foundation is a state-registered charitable entity. Its financial irregularities are a state matter." He looked at her. "If the physical records go to the state AG's office tonight, before Frost's people get to Marcus, it bypasses Frost entirely. The state AG opens an independent investigation. Frost can't touch a parallel state proceeding without visibility that destroys him. And a state proceeding with physical documentation pulls in the federal elements through a side door that..." He stopped. The parking structure level. The elevator opened. Dark. Low-ceilinged. The specific smell of a building's underground, concrete and exhaust, and something chemical from the drainage systems. Cassian came out of the elevator first, held the door, scanned the structure, moved. She followed. Her bare feet on cold concrete, blood drying in the lines of her palms, the silver dress a thing that belonged to a different evening. "The state AG," she said, keeping pace beside him. "Can you get the records to them tonight? I can get them to the night intake system. But for the filing to trigger an immediate protective order, the kind that creates a public record before Frost can act, it needs to be filed by someone with standing." He looked at her sideways. "It needs to be filed by you." She processed this. "I'm the Foundation's co-director." "You're the Foundation's co-director with original document physical evidence of irregularities in your own charitable organization. You have standing to file a formal complaint with the state AG requesting investigation. The moment that complaint is filed and time-stamped, it becomes a public record. Frost can't suppress a public record without the suppression itself becoming the crime. You need me to file tonight. I need you to file while Marcus is still in transit, before anyone can reach the storage unit and change the condition of those physical records." He stopped behind a large concrete pillar. A dark vehicle was parked 2 rows over. Not the convoy from earlier, something smaller, civilian grade. One of his people was behind the wheel, engine running. "It means going to the state AG building. Tonight. In what you're wearing. Without preparation." He looked at her steadily. "And it means putting your name on the document that starts all of this. Publicly, permanently." She understood what he was telling her. Once her name was on that filing, there was no walking it back. Adrian would know it came from her. Frost would know it came from her. Every remaining ally of theirs, every pressure point they might find, every version of the past 3 years they might try to weaponize. All of it would be pointed directly at Selene Vale, named complainant, co-director of the Alistair Vale Foundation, the woman who lit the match. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "You understand what—" "I understand." She held his gaze, man. "Let's go." The state AG building was 16 blocks north. They made it in 9 minutes, the driver running lights where he could without creating the wrong kind of attention. Selene sat in the back seat and held her ruined hands in her lap and breathed. Cassian was on the phone. Low, fast, the language she didn't recognize, and then English, and then the other language again. At one point he said a name, not Davan, not Adrian, not Frost. A name she didn't recognize, and his voice when he said it had a quality that made her not ask. 2 minutes from the building, he ended the call and looked at her. "Davan," he said. He called in. Voluntarily. A pause. He gave us the name of the third party who approached him. The person Adrian and Frost used as the intermediary. Another pause. Shorter. "It wasn't someone from my operation. It was from yours." She stared at him. "Mine. Your divorce attorney," he said. Garrett Line. "He's been Adrian's inside channel for 14 months. That's how Adrian knew about your early consultations with forensic accounting. That's how he knew about Petra Hollis before you told anyone else. That's how they accessed the archive. Line had communications access to Petra's system from a joint filing 3 years ago that was never revoked. Garrett Line, who had told her to get a second attorney, who had made that recommendation with such careful professional distance, who had flagged the irregularities with just enough concern to seem helpful and just enough vagueness to be useless, who had been there at the beginning of all of it, her first call when the divorce became real. She thought about the $11 transaction at a gas station she'd never been to. Not a warning, a test, to see if she'd change behavior and in which direction. She thought about how much she'd said to Garrett Line in 30 months of professional relationship. "Okay," she said. The word came out flatter than she intended, scraped down to its minimal function. "Okay," he said. "I'll deal with that later." She looked at the building coming up through the window. "Right now I'm going to walk in there and file the complaint." The car stopped. She looked down at herself. Bare feet. Blood on her palms, dried now, dark against the lines of her skin. Silver satin that had survived a rooftop and a 12-foot drop and a parking structure with a dignity she hadn't expected from it. Her grandmother's diamonds still in her ears, cold and certain. She looked up. "How do I look?" she said. Cassian looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression. Not the almost smile, not the controlled professional assessment. Something more direct than either of those things. Something that had been there for a while and had run out of room to stay contained. "Like someone who's already decided," he said. She got out of the car. The state AG building's night intake operated out of a side entrance on the building's east face. A window, a security door, a bored-looking clerk at 11:40 p.m. who was not prepared for a woman in a damaged silver gown with bare feet and dried blood on her hands to appear at his window with a document request. She gave her name. She gave her title, co-director, Alistair Vale Foundation, state registration number, which she had memorized 3 years ago because her grandfather had made her memorize it when she took the role, said a director should know their organization's number the way a captain knows their vessel's registration. He'd been right about most things. The clerk found the formal complaint form. He printed it. He slid it through the window with a look that contained several questions he was professionally obligated not to ask. She filled it out. Her handwriting was unsteady from the adrenaline residue in her hands, but it was legible. Foundation name, registration number, nature of complaint, financial irregularities, potential fraudulent disbursement, request for immediate independent investigation. Dates, amounts, names. Adrian Mercer, Harlan Frost, Deputy Director, Federal Financial Crimes Division. She paused at Frost's name. Writing a deputy federal director's name on a complaint filed at 11:40 p.m. in a building nobody was watching was either the bravest or the most reckless thing she'd done all night. She thought about the distinction for approximately 2 seconds and then wrote his name. She signed the bottom. Selene Vale. Foundation co-director. Date. Time. She slid it back through the window. The clerk stamped it. The timestamp printer was loud in the empty intake room. A mechanical thunk that sounded more significant than a machine had any right to sound. Processing and public record entry will complete its start of business tomorrow morning, the clerk said. He had recalibrated his expression to something professionally neutral. You'll receive a confirmation number by... The record is created now, she said. Not a question. The intake record is created at time of stamp. Yes, ma'am. It's in the system. She took the confirmation copy he printed for her. She walked back out to the car. She got in, held the confirmation copy in her damaged hands. The paper was warm from the printer. Cassian was watching her. It's filed, she said. He took his phone out and did something on it that she didn't ask about. Then, Marcus is at the storage unit. Is he alone? So far. A pause. Selene, the records, if they're there, if they're intact. His phone rang. He looked at it. Something happened in his face. That thing again, the update she'd learned to watch for, the millimeter shift that contained more information than most people's full expressions. He answered it. He listened for 45 seconds. She counted. Then he said quietly, How many? He listened again. Understood. He ended the call. He looked at her. They're there, he said. The records. Physical files, undisturbed, exactly where Marcus expected them. He paused. But there are 2 vehicles parked outside the facility. They arrived 3 minutes after Marcus. They're not moving. Frost's people. Or Adrian's. The distinction doesn't matter. They're waiting for Marcus to come out with the files. She looked at him. Can your man with Marcus... 1 man. 2 vehicles means at minimum 4 people. He held her gaze. I need to get to that facility. Then go. I'm not leaving you in the city without... You just said Marcus is out there with 1 man and 4 people waiting. She looked at him with the specific patience of a person who has already done the calculation. I filed the complaint. The record exists. What happens to me tonight? Frost can detain me. He can make it complicated, but he cannot make me disappear without the detention showing up in a public record that I can now point to the complaint to contextualize. She held up the confirmation copy. This is my leverage now. You being here doesn't improve my leverage. You being in that storage facility does. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him running it, assessing, calculating, the thing he did. She watched him arrive at the same answer she had. Petra Hollis, he said. She's compromised through Line's access, but she's not compromised personally. Call her directly, not through any system Line might have touched. Tell her what's happened. She needs to be at that facility by... I'll handle Petra. And you don't go anywhere alone. You stay in... Cassian. She put her hand on his arm. He stopped. She looked at him directly. The full thing, not managed, not filtered through the adrenaline or the evening's accumulated violence. Go get the records. I'll be here when you get back. He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. The driver was waiting. The city was outside the windows doing its indifferent thing. The timestamp on the complaint copy in her hands read 11:47 p.m. 3 hours, he said. The facility and back. 3 hours. He was still for 1 second, the specific stillness she'd learned to read as a decision being finalized. Then he said, There's a hotel 2 blocks east, the Callaway. It's not connected to anyone. Go there. Room will be under a name. He said a name she didn't recognize. They'll have a key for you. Lock the door. Don't open it unless it's me or Petra. Don't use the room phone. Okay? Your hands need to be cleaned. I know. Selene. He said her name with a weight that she wasn't sure how to carry yet. When I get back... I know, she said again. Differently. He held her gaze for 1 more second. Then he got out of the car, and another vehicle she hadn't noticed appeared from around the corner. Black, moving with purpose. And he was in it, and it was gone. She sat in the back seat of the remaining car and held the confirmation copy against her knee and breathed. She thought about what came next. About Marcus driving out of that storage facility with 40 years of her grandfather's meticulous record-keeping. About Adrian in his gray cashmere coat somewhere in this city, doing the math on what the night had cost him. About Frost, who had spent 11 months managing something he thought was contained and had just watched it come apart at multiple points simultaneously. About Garrett Line, who had sat across from her in professional consultation and fed every word back to the people trying to destroy her. She thought about Davin Rice, who had a daughter with a medical condition, and what it meant to be the instrument of something you'd been given no choice about. She thought about a coat placed over her shoulders in the rain. She looked at the driver. 2 blocks east, she said. The Callaway. He drove. The room was on the 14th floor. Clean, minimal, the anonymous decency of a hotel that catered to people with business rather than pleasure. She sat on the edge of the bed and called Petra Hollis at 12:04 a.m., and Petra answered on the second ring, which told her everything she needed to know about whether Petra had been sleeping. She told Petra everything, not in order, in the order it came out, which was imperfect but complete. Petra listened without interrupting, which was a skill Selene had previously appreciated in a professional context, and now found she was grateful for on a more fundamental level. When she finished, Petra said, "The state AG filing. You're certain it's time-stamped and in the intake system. 11:47 p.m. Okay." She heard Petra moving, the specific sounds of someone getting out of bed and becoming operational. Line? He's been your attorney of record for 30 months. Yes. Which means anything you told him under that relationship, I know what it means. There may be information he passed that we'll need to assess damage on. I need to know everything significant you discussed with him over 30 months. I know. She looked at her hands. Dried blood in the palm lines, the skin raw at the edges. Petra. Yes. Are you safe? Your system, Cassian said the archive breach came through a dormant access line had to your firm's server. A pause. I'm going to have my IT partner at this building in 20 minutes, Petra said. We'll assess what was accessed and what was taken. Another pause. The corruption of Cassian's archive, was it full? He believes the primary documentation is gone. But the underlying evidence, the original sources, he's getting the physical records from Marcus's storage facility right now. If he gets there before... Petra stopped herself. Okay. If the physical records are intact and transferred to my custody with a clean chain of evidence, I can work with that. The sound of shoes, a door. Selene, I need you to stay exactly where you are. I know, and I need you to understand that what you did tonight, filing that complaint with those names on it, I know what I did. No, I need you to hear this. Petra's voice dropped half a register, not softer, more direct. What you did tonight is going to be very loud in the morning. There will be no quiet version of what comes next. I need to know that you're ready for loud. Selene looked at the window, the city through it, orange and gray and continuous, not caring, not stopping. She thought about signing a divorce paper with a nearly empty pen. She thought about 3 years of being looked at and not seen. She thought about a confirmation copy with her name on it and a timestamp that was now 11 minutes old and already in a system she didn't control and couldn't take back. I'm ready, she said. She ended the call. She sat in the quiet of the room and waited. Her hands throbbed. Her feet were cold. The dress was a wreck. Outside, Blackthorn City ran through its midnight procedures, traffic thinning, the shift change of the city's overnight life. Somewhere to the north, a siren peaking and fading. At 12:31, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number she recognized. Records intact. Full original file set. Transferring to Petra's custody now. She exhaled. And, she typed, a pause. Then, the vehicles outside the facility. They weren't Frost's people. She went very still. They were Adrian's private contractors, 4 of them. Another pause. Longer. We have them. They're not going to be a problem tonight. She read that twice and decided not to ask what not a problem meant precisely. Then another message. There was someone with them. A pause that felt, even through a text message, like wait. Running communications, directing their position. Who? She typed. The response took 90 seconds. When it came, she read it, and then she read it again. And then she set the phone face down on the bed and put both her damaged hands over her face and stayed there for a long moment in the dark behind her palms. Because the name in that message was not Adrian's name, and it was not Frost's name, and it was not Garrett Lyne's name. It was a name she recognized from a photograph in a newspaper, blurred, caught at the edge of a frame, turning away from a camera. A name from 19 months ago, from a profile that described, with careful legal hedging, connections to organized crime at the highest levels of Blackthorn City's financial infrastructure. It was a name that belonged to someone who was supposed to be Cassian's enemy. And it was a name that was connected through 3 intermediary layers that had taken Cassian 19 months to map to a single point of origin, a holding company. 4 years old, predating the marriage, predating everything. Predating, she realized, with the specific cold that went all the way through to the bone, the gallery opening where a man had appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of wine and a voice dropped half an octave. She picked up the phone. She typed, "Cassian, how long have you known?" The 3 dots appeared, stopped, appeared again. And then the message that came back was not an answer to her question. It was 3 words, "Get out, now." And simultaneously, from the corridor outside her room, 4 floors above the building's lobby level, she heard what she had heard before, the specific sound of a coordinated entry team, multiple people moving with professional patience. And this time there was no Cassian beside her, no man at the end of the corridor, no door at the end of a stairwell. Just a 14th floor room, at a window with a city behind it, a phone with 3 words on the screen, and the soft, unmistakable sound of a keycard reader. The keycard reader beeped once. Selene was already moving, not toward the door, away from it, across the room, the phone still in her hand, the 3 words still on the screen. "Get out, now!" She hit the bathroom, not because it was safe, but because it had a window, a narrow, frosted casement on the building's exterior face, and she was already calculating whether a 14-story drop had any version of survivable when she heard the room door open, not crash open. Not the dramatic entry of someone who needed to demonstrate force. It opened with the quiet precision of someone who had a key. She stopped in the bathroom doorway. The woman who stepped into the room was perhaps 55, in a dark coat, with the kind of face that had been structured once and then rearranged by time and something harder than time into something that was less beautiful and more permanent. Her hair was gray at the temples, dark elsewhere, pulled back with the functional severity of a person for whom appearance was a resource to be managed rather than performed. She was alone. The door closed behind her. She looked at Selene. She looked specifically at Selene's hands, the dried blood, the raw skin, and at the ruined dress, and at the phone, and her expression ran through a calculation Selene couldn't fully track. "Put the phone down," she said. Her voice was low, accented, Eastern European somewhere under the English. "Not because I'm threatening you, because I need 2 minutes of your attention and the phone is going to interrupt them." Selene did not put the phone down. "Who are you?" she said. "My name is Mara Volich." She said it without hesitation, which was either bravery or a signal that the name was expected to mean something. It did. It landed in the back of Selene's memory and pulled up that conversation. Cassian at the storage facility, the text message, the name that had appeared connected to the vehicles outside. "I've been listening to this evening with some interest. You had people outside the storage facility." "I had people watching the storage facility," Mara said. The distinction was precise and deliberate. "There's a difference. Your people and Adrian's contractors were in the same location. My people were watching Adrian's contractors." She moved to the chair near the window, not threatening, unhurried, the movement of someone who had decided the geography of the room and was arranging herself accordingly. She sat. She folded her hands. "May I?" Selene stayed in the bathroom doorway. "You were directing the contractors." "I was observing the contractors. I've been observing Adrian Mercer's operations for a while now." She looked at Selene steadily. "Not as long as Cassian, but long enough to know what he was building and why it would fail." It didn't fail. It nearly failed. The archive corruption, the witnesses. If you hadn't filed the complaint tonight, if the physical records hadn't been intact. She paused. "It was closer than Cassian is going to tell you." Selene came 3 steps into the room. Her feet were still bare on the hotel carpet. She was aware of how she looked. Wrecked, blood-handed, standing in front of a woman who appeared to have had a normal evening, and she made a decision to not care about that. Why are you here? Because Cassian is going to arrive in approximately 20 minutes, and before he does, there are things you should hear from someone who has been watching him as long as she's been watching Adrian. Why would I trust anything you tell me? Mara looked at her, not offended, more the look of someone who had anticipated the question and considered it reasonable. You shouldn't, not automatically. She unfolded her hands. But you already have a question you don't have an answer to. You asked him in a text message how long he'd known. He didn't answer. Instead, he told you to run. She paused. That's an answer of its own. Selene's pulse was doing something in her throat again. Known what? How long he knew about the holding company, Mara said. The one that connects to my name. The one that predates Adrian's interest in you by 4 years. She watched Selene's face. You found it tonight. The connection. You saw that the holding company running Adrian's operation had a layer that traces back to an entity I'm associated with. Yes. And you thought what? The Cassian was connected to Adrian from the beginning, that the entire 22 months was something built around you, rather than for you. Tell me it wasn't, Selene said. Flat, direct. Mara was quiet for a moment. The holding company you found, she said, is a shell. It was constructed 8 years ago as part of an operation that predates both Adrian and your marriage by years. It was designed to look like it connected upward to my organization. She paused. I did not build it. I did not use it. It was built by someone who wanted, at some future point, to be able to draw a line from Adrian Mercer's criminal structure to my organization and use that line to damage me. She looked at Selene. That someone is Harlan Frost. The room was very quiet. Frost built the shell, Selene said slowly, to implicate you. As a contingency. If his relationship with Adrian ever became exposed, the shell gives him a weapon, evidence of my involvement that he constructed himself and could deploy to redirect attention. Mara's jaw was set. Cassian found the shell 14 months ago. He understood immediately what it was and who built it, and he understood that if he followed the connection to me. She stopped. He'd find out Frost had been building a frame around you, Selene said, and Frost would know someone was close enough to find it, which would have accelerated Frost's timeline, caused him to act earlier, suppress more, burn more of what Cassian had built. Mara looked at her hands. Cassian made a decision to not follow that thread, to work around it, to build the case against Adrian in a way that eventually exposed Frost without directly pulling the shell structure into the open. And you knew he'd found it. I've known for 11 months. And you've been, watching to see what he'd do with it. Watching to see if he was trustworthy with it, Mara said simply. A man who finds evidence that could be used against someone and chooses not to use it is a man worth understanding. Selene looked at her, at the gray at her temples and the rearranged quality of her face. The vehicle's outside the storage facility tonight. You were there to protect the records. I was there because I knew Frost had been told about the physical files. I knew he'd move on the storage facility. And I knew that if Adrian's contractors got to those records before Marcus, she paused, everything Cassian built would have ended tonight in a way that nobody recovered from. Why didn't you tell him? If you've been watching for 11 months, because I needed to know if he'd get there himself. Mara looked at her steadily. And because there are some things a man has to do without a safety net before you trust him with anything that matters. She stood from the chair. I'm telling you this because in 20 minutes, he's going to walk through that door and you're going to have that question on your face and he's going to try to explain, and the explanation is going to be incomplete because he's going to be trying to manage how much it affects the way you look at him. She moved toward the door. I'm making it simpler. Selene watched her cross the room. Why do you care how I look at him? Mara stopped at the door. She turned back and for a moment something in her expression shifted. Not soft exactly, but less armored, the look of someone who has been watching something from a distance for long enough to have an opinion about it. Because he made a choice 14 months ago that cost him leverage and protected someone he'd never met, and the reason he made that choice was you. She paused. The file on you. He'd been building it as secondary documentation to the Adrian investigation. At some point, he'll tell you when, if you ask directly, it stopped being secondary. She held Selene's gaze. A man who reroutes 19 months of work because of who someone is rather than what they're worth to him. She stopped herself. That's not my story to tell. I've told you what was mine to tell. She opened the door. Mara, Selene said. She stopped. The shell company. When this is over. When Frost is exposed, it comes apart with him, Mara said. That's already handled. A pause. Your foundation's name will be clean. She left. The door closed. Selene sat on the edge of the bed and held her damaged hands in her lap and breathed through everything that had just happened, which was too large to process in the 20 minutes she had before the next thing arrived. She processed it anyway. Cassian came through the door at 12:58 a.m. He looked like a man who had been through the same evening she had, but from the outside of it, which in some ways was worse. His jacket was gone, lost somewhere between the roof and here. His shirt had a tear along the left shoulder seam that she was going to ask about later, and his jaw carried the beginning of something that would be a bruise by morning. He came in, closed the door, looked at her. He registered her expression. He stopped. She was here, he said. Not a question. Yes. He looked at the window, the city behind it. He looked like a man doing the specific internal accounting of someone who has been trying to manage information in a specific sequence and has just found out the sequence was disrupted. What did she tell you? Enough. Selene looked at him. She told me about the shell company, about Frost building it, about you finding it 14 months ago and choosing not to pull it. He was quiet. She told me why she thinks you made that choice. He looked at her then. The full weight of his attention, nothing managed about it. The thing she'd seen briefly on the roof, stripped of the operational context that had surrounded it all evening. What did she say? She said the file on me stopped being secondary. Selene held his gaze. She said you made a choice that cost you leverage. She said the reason was me. A pause. She said that was her version and yours might be different. He was very still. Is it different? She said. He crossed the room and sat in the chair Mara had vacated, and he sat in it the way he sat in most things, without performance, without arrangement. And he looked at his own hands for a moment, the right one with its repair history, and then he looked at her. 7 months into the investigation, he said. I was building the financial map, following Adrian's transactions back through the layers, and I found the foundation, the Alistair Vale Foundation. He paused. I found the disbursement records, the legitimate ones, the real charitable work, the education grants, the women's organizations your grandfather had built relationships with over 30 years, all of it running in parallel with what Adrian was doing to it, the legitimate and the corrupted side by side. She listened. I pulled everything I could find on the foundation's history, on your grandfather, on you. He held her gaze. And I found a recording, archived from 4 years ago, a foundation board meeting. You'd just taken over as co-director after your parents died, and someone proposed shutting the education grants for a reallocation review, and you... He stopped, something in his face. You said, I'm going to get this wrong because I'm paraphrasing. You said that your grandfather built this foundation on the principle that money given to a woman's education couldn't be taken back, that the whole point was irreversibility. That you weren't shutting the grants for a reallocation review, you were shutting them for good if you did that, because trust, once broken, doesn't reallocate. She remembered that meeting. She hadn't thought about it in 2 years. And I sat with that for a while, he said, with the fact that the person Adrian was planning to frame and destroy had said that, about irreversibility, about trust. His jaw was very slightly tight. And something changed in how I was running the investigation. She said nothing, letting him get there. I went back through everything Adrian had built, not to find what connected to the federal case, to find what connected to you, to understand the full shape of what he was doing to you specifically. He looked at the window, and the more I understood the shape of it, the more precise the case became, more targeted. Not because it improved the legal architecture. He paused. Because I was angry. The word landed in the room with a weight that was disproportionate to its size. Angry, she said. At the specific care he'd taken, Cassian said. At the 19 separate steps he'd taken to make sure that when it collapsed, you were the one holding it. He looked at her. I don't operate from anger as a rule. It's imprecise. It creates problems. A beat. This was the exception. She held his gaze. The coat. Outside the courthouse. I wanted to see you, he said. In person. After 7 months of a file, I told myself... He stopped. I told myself a number of things. None of them were the actual reason. What was the actual reason? He was quiet for a moment that was different from his usual silence. Less controlled. More the silence of a man who has arrived at a sentence he has not prepared. I wanted to know if the person I'd built in my understanding of you was accurate, he said, or if I'd made something up. And? You were standing in the rain, he said, not looking for shelter, not performing anything, just standing there, taking it. Something moved through his expression, and I thought, no, I didn't make anything up. The room was very quiet. Selene looked at him for a long time, at the bruise beginning under his jaw, at the torn shoulder seam, at the hands with their repair history resting on his knees with that characteristic stillness that she had spent one evening learning to read and would, she thought, spend considerably longer understanding. You should have told me, she said, about the shell, about what you found, about all of it. Yes, he said, no qualification. You were managing me. I was trying to protect the sequence, he said, the order in which you knew things. I thought... He stopped. I thought if you knew the full shape too early, before I had the case far enough along, I'd what? He looked at her. Make choices I couldn't predict, from a position I couldn't adequately protect. He paused. I was wrong to frame it that way. Yes, she said, you were. He held her gaze. He didn't argue it. I know. She exhaled slowly. She looked at her hands, the dried blood in the lines of her palms, the raw skin at the edges. She thought about what it meant to have someone arrange the world around you in your best interest without your knowledge. The specific claustrophobia of it, the specific, she searched for the word, the specific grief of discovering that someone's protection and someone's control could look exactly the same from the inside. She thought about what it meant that the distinction between those two things was the thing she was going to have to decide about. Not tonight. Tonight was too large and too raw. But soon. The physical records, she said. Marcus got them out. Petra has them. She's been working for the last 2 hours. Her IT partner confirmed the scope of the breach through Line's access. Limited to the archive transfer, contained. The core of her system is clean. Line. Petra has reported him to the state bar. There will be a disbarment proceeding. Additionally, he paused. There are things in the communication logs between Line and Adrian that have implications beyond bar discipline. Petra is aware. And Frost. The state AG complaint is in the public record as of 11:47 tonight. Frost's name on it. Petra filed a supplementary emergency motion at 2 a.m. requesting a judicial review of the federal detention order, citing the named connection between the ordering official and the subject of the complaint. He held her gaze. The detention order has been suspended pending review, which means if Frost tries to move on you today, he creates the exact visibility that destroys him. Yes, she breathed. And Adrian. Cassian was quiet for a moment. His contractors at the storage facility, the ones Mara's people were watching, 3 of them are currently explaining their evening to a state police unit that arrived at the facility at 1:15 a.m. A pause. The 4th, the one running communications, is someone I want to talk to before the state police do. She didn't ask about the 4th. She filed it. And Adrian himself, somewhere in this city, Cassian said. Aware that the evening went wrong in ways he didn't fully anticipate. Aware that the physical records exist and are out of his reach. A pause. Making calls he thinks aren't being monitored. Are they? Yes. She almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile. More the expression of someone whose body has not yet caught up to the fact that the immediate crisis has passed, still running on the adrenaline architecture of a night that had tried several times to end badly. What happens in the morning? The state AG's office opens at 8. The complaint is in the system. Petra will be there at 8:01 with the physical records and a full evidentiary filing. He looked at her. By noon, the state AG We'll have enough to open a formal investigation and issue preservation orders on every piece of Adrian's and Frost's records. Preservation orders are public. Once they're public, it's over, she said. The easy part, he said carefully, is over. She looked at him. There's a harder part. There's always a harder part. He held her gaze. The legal proceedings. Testimony. The specific public quality of having your name attached to something like this. The Foundation's reputation during the investigation period, before the exoneration is complete. He paused. You're going to be visible in ways you haven't been before. Some of that visibility is going to be unkind. She thought about this. About the word Petra had used, loud. I told Petra I was ready for loud. I know, she called me. Something in his expression. She said you sounded like you meant it. I did mean it. I know. He held her gaze for a moment. I know you did. Outside the Callaway Hotel's 14th floor window, Blackthorn City was beginning the specific process of becoming morning. Not daylight yet. The sky above the skyline was still the deep blue-gray of the hour before first light. The city's overnight infrastructure still running, but with a quality of accumulation to the darkness that suggested it was nearly done. Selene stood at the window with her damaged hands wrapped around a cup of coffee from the room's machine. Bad coffee, the kind that was a temperature rather than a flavor, but warm, and watched the city begin to turn. She heard Cassian behind her, not close, giving her the window. The recording, she said, the board meeting, that you found in the archive. Yes. About irreversibility. Yes. She looked at the lightening sky. My grandfather said that to me first, when I was 12. He was explaining why he'd structured the Foundation's grant disbursements as non-recoverable. No clawback provisions. Once a grant was given, it was given. She felt the memory of it. Her grandfather's study, the smell of old books and coffee, him at his desk and her on the floor doing homework, looking up because he'd said something that snagged. I asked him what happened if someone used the money wrong, did the wrong thing with it. She paused. He said, if you've chosen well, they won't. And if you've chosen wrong, that's yours to carry, not theirs. The money is already theirs. You don't take back what you've already given. She heard Cassian shift behind her. I've been thinking about that all night, she said, in the gaps between everything else. She looked at the city, about what gets given and what gets taken back and what the difference is. She turned from the window. He was standing in the center of the room, not the operational stillness, something more open than that, something that was waiting rather than watching. She looked at the bruise under his jaw, properly visible now in the room's light. She looked at the tear in his shoulder seam. Come here, she said. He crossed the room. She reached up and put her palm, carefully, the undamaged edge, against the side of his face, against the bruise, not pressing, just covering it with her hand. He went very still in the way he went still when he was deciding rather than waiting. I'm angry about the information you managed, she said. I'm going to continue to be angry about it for a while. And you're going to tell me everything I ask when I ask it, from here on out. Not sequenced, not managed. She held his gaze. Understood? Understood, he said. And in return, she held his face in her damaged hand. Whatever 22 months of your work cost you, whatever decisions you made for reasons you told yourself were tactical. She looked at him directly. I see those too. I'm not... She stopped, found the right word. I'm not going to pretend they were nothing. Something moved through his expression. The thing that had been almost something all evening finally arrived, unguarded, unmanaged. The thing underneath all that precision. It was quieter than she'd expected, more like relief than anything dramatic, like a weight set down. He put his hand over hers where it rested against his jaw, not removing it, holding it there. Okay, he said. They stood at the window of a 14th floor hotel room while Blackthorn City got on with becoming morning, and it wasn't resolved. Not the legal case, not the shape of what they were to each other, not the distance between what had been managed and what had been true. But it was real, which was something neither of them had been entirely sure about for a long time. Marcus called at 6:47 a.m. She answered on the first ring. Are you okay? I'm at Petra's office, he said. His voice had the flattened quality of someone who had been awake through something significant. I have coffee and 3 paper cuts from 40 years of your grandfather's filing system, and I need you to know that he organized these records alphabetically by recipient name and not by date, which is a choice I have feelings about. She laughed. It came out ragged and too large, the laugh of a person whose body has been waiting for permission. Is everything there? Everything. 40 years, Selene. Every disbursement, every signature, It's all here. A pause. Petra's been working for 4 hours. She says by noon. I know. Are you... He stopped. Did the calculation she recognized, the one about how much to ask. Are you okay? She looked at the window. The sky outside was lighter now, actual gray rather than blue-gray, the first suggestion of a horizon forming above the skyline. Yes, she said, and then, actually yes, not performing it. A pause. The man, Cassian Drax. Marcus. I'm just... Another pause. Grandpa would have wanted to know that someone... He stopped again. She could hear him finding the shape of what he meant. That someone was paying attention when we weren't looking. She felt the back of her throat do something she wasn't going to give in to at 6:47 in the morning. Yeah, she said. He would have. Okay. His voice got brisk in the way it got when he'd said the thing and needed to move past it before one of them cried. Petra says you need to be here by 9. She has documents. I'll be there. She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hands. Then she looked at Cassian, who had been standing at the window with his own coffee and the specific courtesy of a man who understood that some phone calls were not his to be present for, even when he was in the same room. 9 o'clock, she said. I heard. You need to sleep. So do you. 2 hours. She looked at the window. The city was out there doing what cities did, processing the night into morning with its characteristic indifference. Then we go. He looked at her. Stay, she said. Simply. No architecture to it. I'm not asking for... She stopped. I don't want to be in this room by myself until 9. He set down his coffee cup. He sat on the other side of the bed, outside on top of the covers, shoes off, jacket long gone, the torn shirt and the bruise coming in under his jaw. He sat with his back against the headboard and his arms resting on his knees and looked at the window with the particular stillness she had learned in one evening and would spend considerably longer understanding. She lay down. The room was quiet in the way hotels were quiet before the day started. Thick walls and distance and everyone else's sleep surrounding them. The coffee machine on the counter ticked as it cooled. She was not going to sleep. She was certain of that. There was too much in her body. The adrenaline residue, the raw palms, the accumulated weight of a night that had tried several times to go differently, and sleep seemed like a country she hadn't been a citizen of in months. She was asleep in 4 minutes. She did not dream. Or if she did, she didn't carry it back. What she carried back instead, when she woke at 8:32 to the city coming through the window in full morning gray, was the specific quality of waking up in a room where someone else's breathing was the first sound she heard, and finding that it did not feel like a compromise or an imposition or a thing to be assessed. It felt like... She searched for the word. It felt like evidence. Cassian was awake. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, the slight variation in his breathing. He was looking at the window. He had been awake, she suspected, for a while. That capacity he had for patient observation extending to mornings, to the specific gray light coming through hotel glass, to whatever the city was saying about the day ahead. She sat up. He looked at her. His face in the morning light, with the bruise fully established now along his jaw, was the face of a person who had survived a number of things and was in the particular state of having survived one more. Not victorious, not relieved exactly. Present. Very completely present. How's the jaw? She said. It's fine. It's not fine. It's purple. It'll be fine. She looked at him. At the specific stubborn economy of a man who would describe a broken bone as uncomfortable if pressed. You're going to need to work on that, she said. Something in his expression. The almost smile. Noted. She got up. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for the first time since the previous evening's mirror, the one where she'd made decisions about the dress and her grandmother's earrings and what she was willing to become. She looked at the woman in the mirror now. The same dress, comprehensively ruined, the same diamonds in her ears, the raw palms, the hair that had come entirely down and had apparently given up any structural ambition. The lines around her eyes that were new, or that she was seeing newly. She didn't inventory herself against anyone's criteria. She looked at her own face. Then she went back out into the room and picked up her shoes from the floor where she'd held them through a 12-foot drop and a parking structure and apparently the entirety of the previous night. And she held them in her hand and looked at Cassian. "I need to borrow your driver," she said. "He's downstairs. I need 20 minutes to go back to my apartment and change before Petra's office. 20 minutes. He stood from the bed. "I'll come." "You don't—" "I'll come," he said again. Not managing her, just present. She looked at him for a moment. At the bruise and the torn seam and the fact that he'd sat up all night with his back against a headboard to give her 2 hours of sleep in a city that had spent the previous evening trying to dismantle everything both of them had built. "Okay," she said. They went downstairs. The city was out there, cold gray, October becoming November at the edges, the morning traffic beginning its slow accumulation on the streets. The driver had coffee waiting in the car, which was either impressive foresight or something Cassian had arranged from the room. And she didn't ask because she was beginning to understand that some things Cassian arranged without explaining the arrangement, and that this was a quality she was going to have a sustained conversation with him about later, and also, on certain mornings, appreciate. She looked at the city through the car window. Blackthorn City, which had its lights and its corruption and its specific geography of power and the people who held it and the people who were held by it, which had a state AG building with a timestamp on a document in its intake system that was going to make this morning loud in the way Petra had warned, which had a man somewhere in it, in a hotel, in a car, on a phone, who had spent 3 years building something careful and intricate and ultimately futile around the woman he'd chosen and discarded, and who was about to find out what it felt like to be on the receiving end of something he couldn't outmaneuver. She thought about her grandfather's filing system, alphabetical by recipient rather than by date. 40 years of faith that the money given was given for keeps. She thought about irreversibility. She looked at the man sitting beside her in the back seat of a black car moving through the city morning, who had found a recording of her saying something true and had made it the center of gravity of 19 months of work, and who had placed his coat over her shoulders in the rain before she knew his name, and who had told her with complete honesty that the file had stopped being secondary and then struggled to explain why in a way that wasn't incomplete, and who was bruised under the jaw and present and real. She thought about what Mara Volich had said. A man who reroutes 19 months of work because of who someone is rather than what they're worth to him. She thought about what her grandfather had said. If you've chosen well, they won't. And if you've chosen wrong, that's yours to carry. She thought about choosing, about the specific quality of a choice made not from desperation or survival or the narrowed emotional range of a crisis, but from the full width of a morning in a city that was, imperfectly and without apology, still standing. She reached over and put her hand on his. He looked at it, then at her. He turned his hand over and held hers, carefully, the way you hold something damaged, and looked out the window at the city going about its morning business, and she felt the warmth of it, the specific irreversible warmth of a thing given without the architecture of taking it back. They rode through the city in the beginning light. Ahead, Petra's office. The documents, the state AG, the long public business of what came next, the testimony and the proceedings, and the specific loud dismantling of the thing Adrian had spent years building, and the thing Frost had spent years protecting. And after that, harder to see but present, the foundation. Her grandfather's work, her parents' trust, the grants that couldn't be recalled, the education of women in cities that didn't always make that easy, all of it waiting to be rebuilt on ground that was finally, truly, only hers. And after that, harder still to see but real, whatever this was. This man beside her with his repair history and his precise patience and the way he'd said you were never weak, they were simply too blind, not as a comfort but as a fact he'd verified and was reporting. She didn't know the shape of it yet. She was going to find out. The car moved through the city. The morning opened ahead of them, gray and cold and full of the specific difficult brightness of a day that was going to ask a great deal. She held his hand. She was ready.